Emily opened her eyes. Smiling, she stretched, lay in bed a little longer, and finally stood up. She glanced at her bed, the silk sheets, the blankets inlaid with semi-precious stones, the headboard, the black walnut frame. Emmy's eyes sparkled with happiness, and she laughed loudly. "At last my dream has come true," she rejoiced. "And no one will take away my happiness." The girl threw on a robe and walked around her room. She enjoyed ironing the expensive furniture and going through all her clothes in her closet. Emily walked over to a small dressing table with a vintage expensive mirror. "Emmy, you're doing great," she praised herself. Let everyone else burst with envy now. Exactly a week ago, Emily and John Smith had a wedding that was, even by the standards of rich people, very luxurious. The Smiths have been breeding expensive thoroughbred horses for generations. At their famous stables bred not only Arabian racehorses, but also inimitable American thoroughbred horses, French Percherons, and serious scientific and breeding work was constantly carried out to breed new breeds. This business was very profitable. It is very difficult for an uninitiated person to imagine how many millions of dollars were ready to lay out collectors and just amateurs for the purchase of a rare animal. Smith's stables had long been promoted, so they were known not only to local billionaires, but also to Arab sheiks and members of the English royal family, and even presidents of some African countries. The owner was already 76, but old age was to his face, and he did not give up his position. For the last 5 years, cosmetic surgeons have worked tirelessly on his appearance. That's why he couldn't be more than 55. John Smith was a willful man, and no wonder. Never in his life, since his birth, he knew neither need, nor lack of money, nor hard physical work. But after 60, as they say, he got a whim. He began to dream of eternal youth, and did not let anyone but young girls into his life until the age of 30. For such a big money as he had, you could buy everything. That's why there were so many people willing to try their luck. Emily once again checked that everything in her room was in its place. This had become her tradition, as she again convinced herself that all this was not a dream, and that the girl had married one of the richest men in the country. After applying light makeup and unraveling her long hair, Emmy finally went downstairs. The girl knew that her husband had already left for the stable, which was 20 kilometers away from them. John Smith had many properties both in America and abroad, but he preferred his home, which was near Boston, from where he conducted his business. It was also where the hangar of his personal airplane was located. "Good morning, Emily Jones." The housekeeper greeted the girl. "Shall I set the table for you? Or will you have breakfast later?" "No, not at all," replied the young lady. "Let's not do it now, I'm busy. I'll tell you later." She went into the kitchen to check how things were going. Everyone was busy doing things. The girl looked at the workers, the kitchen, and the servants with a displeased look and muttered something to herself. She left the kitchen. "Well, we must see what they are doing here," she said to herself, and went to check how the house was being cleaned. "Well, don't forget to dust that tall closet," Emily said in a businesslike manner, "and clean the couch. There seems to be a stain on it." The cleaners nodded silently and continued their daily work. The girl left the house and went to the janitor. The elderly man looked at her unhappily. "Those old pine trees over there," Emily said. "A few branches are broken. You take them down, or the lawn will be full of them later. And tell the gardener to cut back the roses at the end of the garden," she said in a commanding tone. "I was walking there yesterday. Almost all the bushes are in bloom." George Wilson nodded his head in agreement. The man gave his new mistress an angry look. "How many of you have been here before?" he sighed. "So this is the queen of the sea today, and tomorrow you'll be back to your holy trough again." The janitor took out his rake and went to the big pine tree in the center of the garden. He carefully picked up some needles and put them in the trash can. "Geez, how many chores do I have to do today?" Emmy said to herself worriedly. "How am I supposed to keep up with everything? There's so much work to do. Everybody thinks it's easy to be rich, but nobody knows how hard it is. For example, today I have a beauty salon at 3 o'clock, and then I need at least a couple hours for shopping. Then I plan to stop by work. You can't ignore that. Everyone needs to see what an amazing young wife John has. And for that I have to go to the hairdresser. I'm not going in there with my hairdress. I need to get my hair done. God, how am I going to have time for all this?" Emily sighed sadly. Now that she was almost the first lady of the oligarch world, she had to take care of herself so that no one would ever notice any flaw in her. And for that, Emmy had to know what to wear, what to eat, and how to talk to rich people. John even hired a few people to teach her etiquette, a designer and a cultural critic, so that she could talk to guests on any topic. The girl herself did not realize that 2 days after the wedding she was so much in her role that it seemed to her as if there had never been a village or an old dilapidated farm in her life. Found something to reminisce about, the girl shuddered. To hell with it. It's a good thing I'm rid of it all. Emily got into her expensive car and drove to the finest salon in Boston. She had an appointment there at 10. "Emily Jones, it's so good to see you," sang out the salon receptionist. "How are you?" Svetlana Igorevna, she looked at the woman with a smile. "You can congratulate me. A week ago, John and I signed our marriage." "How happy for you." The receptionist almost threw herself on her neck. "You see? And you were so anxious, weren't you? John told you that you would marry him. Did he keep his word?" "Yes. I've been so nervous. I thought I'd go mad," sighed the girl. "I didn't doubt John's intentions, of course, but he was dragging it out so much. That's why I was scared." "Well, we gave you such powerful treatments last time that you came out just a real queen," the woman praised herself. "So our efforts were not wasted. We don't throw words into the wind. If we say we will, then you will be a queen on the way out." They chatted some more, and the girl walked into a familiar office. It was the most expensive beauty parlor, so to speak, in Boston. Only VIP clients got in here exclusively. For such money, which they asked for the work, you could make a young princess out of an 80-year-old old woman. After 3 hours, Emily Jones looked at herself in the mirror. She liked absolutely everything, but especially the way her eyes had been worked on. Her eyes had become so expressive that no man could resist them. The girl was tired of all these procedures, and after having a cup of coffee with a cake in an elite cafe, she went to an expensive boutique. There she was immediately dressed and redressed. "My God, Emily Jones, you are a goddess. Look at you girls," jumped up and down in front of her. She was enjoying herself very much. She fidgeted in front of the mirror for a few minutes, getting used to the high heels. In about 20 minutes, Emily had paid for everything and was on her way to the hairdresser's. "God, I'm so tired," she complained. "What a busy day today. But I definitely need to visit my stable today." After Emily was fully staffed, she caused quite a furor among everyone. The girl deliberately walked to the big store to enjoy the reactions of passers-by. Men all looked at her without exception. "That's a good thing." Emmy rejoiced. "That's how I want to be greeted at the stables." She went back, got into her car, and took out her cell phone. "Kitty, I have a surprise for you." "I'll come to you soon," she said. "It's about the muzzle," her husband said. "Emmy, are you going to the stables?" "Oh, all right. I'll be looking forward to seeing you. But I have to look into your affairs too," said the girl. "If not me, who will be your support in your life? We're a family now, so I know my responsibilities." With that, she hung up the phone. Emmy was 22, and she didn't know much about life yet. But the girl was so afraid of losing her goldfish that she couldn't see from the outside how she was overplaying her hand. She felt like she needed to be serious and fit in with her new status. Emily pulled up to the stables, and the automatic gate opened in front of her. She drew in a chestful of air and prepared to catch stares of amazement. But as soon as she put her feet on the pavement, she realized she'd made a mistake with her high heels. The platform quickly ended. The girl saw that almost the entire area was paved with stones. She had to forcefully pull her heels out of the cavities. After a few meters, she almost fell. The workers were bustling around her, but they paid no attention to her. "John, I'm here." "Where are you?" she said, trying to hide her displeasure. "Could you meet me?" Emily stood under the awning, cursing rudely at the workers. "Take Eddie to the stall." "You don't have to chase him," she finally heard her husband's voice. An elderly man in high boots came around the bend. "What's the matter, dear?" He hugged his young wife. "You shouldn't have come here. It's never clean here. A horse is a restless animal. No matter how much you clean up after it, there is dirt everywhere. Will you be staying long?" "We'll have the horses out in the fields in half an hour, so I'll have to leave you." "Doggy, I love you so much," she kissed John Smith. "I hope you missed me too." Well, of course, John enjoyed the confessions of the young spouse. "Tonight, I'll prove it to you." With a playful wink, he kissed Emily again and went into the office. "Old fool," the girl scolded to herself. "I spent so much time getting ready and he didn't even compliment me. Not a word, not a word. Not that I'm beautiful, not that I look amazing." At that point, she hadn't yet realized that her husband had been in so many romantic relationships that he was no longer interested in foreplay. He was paying, and paying well, to be loved. But expecting care and attention was never included in that cost. You could say he was paying for one-sided love, Even though he had been married 10 times already, John had always considered himself a free man and changed wives easily. Emmy, on the other hand, thought the important thing was that he married her, and she could handle everything else. The girl naively believed that she could control her husband, but her tactics had been wrong from the start. "All right," Emmy said, starting the car. "I'll adjust from the other side." John Smith had 3 sons from different marriages, adults living their own lives. Only one, Michael, remained in Russia. I should invite Mike to dinner and show him what a hostess I am, the thought flashed through my mind. The old man loves his children, so this should appeal to him. "How would you like it if I threw us a dinner party?" Emily approached her husband that evening. "We could invite Michael." "It's a dead end," she sighed. "Michael's not coming, I know him. After I divorced his mother, he never came to this house." "Well, let's book a table at the restaurant and all right, sit down." The girl did not persist. "He is your son. We need to build a relationship." There was a loud laugh from John Smith. His wife looked at him in amazement. "He still can't forgive me for abandoning his mother. Do you want him to sit with you?" He said through laughter. "He hates all my wives, former and future." "But I hope that I will be the last in this list," said the wife ironically. "Who knows?" John Smith replied cryptically. "Life is such a thing. Today you seem to like someone, and the next day you wake up and can't understand what that woman is doing in your bed." Emily was shocked by what she heard. From that day forward, she decided not to take any chances and keep things under control. She didn't realize that her husband had already been through so much hand-holding that he was able to understand all female psychology with his eyes closed. "Well, we'll see about future wives," she said to herself. "Be sure I'll be the last." "What is your favorite thing about women?" she asked aloud. "When they obey me," laughed John Smith. "I'm so tired of these willful women that I just want a quiet life." The next day, Emily woke up with a heavy head. She couldn't get her husband's words of obey out of her mind. To him, what's that like? She thought. Closing your mouth when he said, "Shut your mouth." Or does it mean being humble? Now, he's given me a conundrum. The girl got out of bed, opened her closet. Her spirits lifted and she went downstairs to chase the servants around a bit. "What is it again?" said the young mistress, pointing to the table. "Is this the second day you haven't changed the roses? I remember. Yesterday they were exactly the same. But they haven't wilted yet," surprised the housekeeper, "and they smell good. Do you want to wait until they look like a graveyard?" Emily looked at her angrily. "Put fresh ones in now." "All right," the woman said shortly and headed out of the dining room. "Fresh flowers will be here right away." The mistress checked on the other workers in the house and, after giving them all a haughty look, went back upstairs to her room. She was about to go into her room when suddenly her phone rang and an unfamiliar number popped up. Emmy heard a familiar voice. "Daughter, how are you doing? Are you completely burnt out?" Emmy said angrily. "I told you never to call me again. Just so you know, I'll block all your numbers. So don't get on my nerves or your own." "But you can't do that." Through tears, said the mother, "I'm worried about you." "Well, then just imagine that I'm dead," the girl shouted in anger and passed out. Emily threw herself on the bed. Her mother reminded her of her past, and the girl never wanted to remember it again. She was living a completely different life now, and would give anything not to go back. "The idiot has taken to ruining my whole mood," she said indignantly. "She probably thinks that if I've arranged a better future for myself, she'll get something too. Let them roam around in their own backwoods with their cows. I hate her so much. She couldn't even buy me an apartment in the city. She never had any money. Let her know where she belongs." Life was hard for Deborah Jones, Emily's mother. Father and mother were the most famous family of alcoholics. Both drank without a drink. The girl was hungry all her childhood, eating what someone brought, and from the clothes she got only neighbors' clothes. No one from the village reported her parents, and the child stayed at home. When Emily was 12 years old, her father, being drunk, drowned in the local river. Her mother started drinking after that. At first, some drunken man appeared in their house, but after a year, Emily's mother threw him out. She didn't love her daughter and couldn't love her, because no one had ever seen her sober. It was 3 months before Emily was to be 17 years old when her mother died of cirrhosis of the liver. This did not embarrass the girl in the slightest. She had been living her life for a long time. When she was only 15, she started working as a milkmaid. The collective farm in which the whole village worked had a small farm. There were about 5 people working there. Deborah Jones worked there all her life. When she was 20, a neighbor boy, Ben, asked her to marry. They had a modest wedding and started living together. But 3 years after the birth of their daughter, her husband left her and went to the city in search of a better life. So the woman had to pull everything on her own. She never married again. From childhood, Emmy showed great ambition. At first, her mother thought it was just a game for the girl. Her dolls turned into heroines of her stories, where the protagonist waited for the prince, and he appeared. When I grow up, 10-year-old Emmy said, "I'm going to live in a big house and wear expensive dresses." Right, her mother stroked her daughter's head. "That's not likely to happen. You won't earn much here in the village, and I don't have money for the city." "But if you don't believe me," said the girl angrily, "then I'll live in my house without you." At first, Deborah Jones took no offense at her daughter, but the older she grew, the more prickly her words became. Sometimes the mother took offense deliberately. "If you loved me even a little, you wouldn't live like this," Emily once told her. "Why wouldn't I?" the mother wondered. "Do I steal or drink? You have no dignity. Don't you know your own worth?" The girl replied arrogantly. "If I had a daughter, I would by all means find a wealthy man and marry him." "Where would you get one?" Her mother tried to turn the conversation into a joke. "You can't buy them at the store." "You haven't even tried looking." Her daughter looked at her angrily. "You don't need anything but your village." "You know what? I'm completely satisfied with my life." Her mother looked at her sternly. "And if you lack anything in your life, you must achieve it yourself." "I will," the girl shouted in fury. "You can rest assured I won't stay here." After this incident, Deborah Jones tried several times to talk calmly with her daughter, but she only snapped. One day, when Emily had finished school, she approached her mother. "I need money," she declared. "I'm going to town." "Well, where am I going to get it for you?" Mother tried to explain the situation. "You know we live on my salary alone." "Borrow it from somebody," calmly replied the daughter. "Go to the Kurpatovs." "And what will I pay back?" the mother asked in amazement. "Or are you going to pay them back yourself?" "There's more," Emily said arrogantly. "Can't you even do that for me?" "You know, Emmy," her mother said angrily, "I've already fulfilled all my obligations to you. You want to go to town, then you go do it yourself." "Do you even?" shouted the daughter at her mother in a rage. "I don't understand why you haven't been deprived of your maternal rights. What kind of mother are you?" "That's good." Deborah Jones looked her sternly in the eye. "From this day forward, we'll live like neighbors. Wherever you like, that's where you can get your money for food." At first, Emily paid no attention to her mother's words, but what was her surprise when the woman no longer cooked anything and stopped buying groceries. Emily ate at her farm and took everything she bought there. After a few days, Emmy couldn't take it anymore and gave her mother a real scandal. "What's the matter?" Her mother replied calmly. "You'll be 19 in 2 weeks. I've been working on a farm since I was 15, and nothing," she said. "Do you know?" The daughter shouted at the top of her voice. "I'm going to make a mess of you. I'll file a report on you." The next day, she went to the local district police officer. She told a long and colorful story about how her mother oppresses her and doesn't give her food. The policeman said, "Emmy, you are legally an adult. You are not disabled, so you have no claim to anything in your mother's house while she is alive." After sitting for a few days for tea and jam, the girl finally realized that her mother would no longer babysit her. She went to the neighbors and wanted to borrow money from them, but they refused her. "Emmy, if you could work, who would mind?" said a tanned woman as she came out of the gate. "So what are you going to pay back with?" That night, the mother couldn't bear it and decided to have a serious talk with her daughter. "All right, Emmy, do you want to leave?" she said. "Then go out and work somewhere. In a year, you'll have money, and then you can go wherever you want to go. Right now, we need a man at the bakery and at our farm." "Are you out of your mind?" Emily screamed, like a madwoman. "I'm going to carry more weights so that I can eat bread bought with the money I used to carry those weights." "You didn't squander and eat, did you?" Her mother, as stubborn as her father, looked at her sternly. "I thought someone in town needed you, and there you are. Maybe I should find my father." The girl was glad. Then I could stay with him. He'd kill himself for a penny, and he wouldn't want you. Deborah Jones shook her head. "How do you know?" "Maybe he's living well now," objected her daughter. "He's in your town picking up bottles," laughed her mother. "Our foreman saw him there recently, so if you want to go, go." Emily resisted for a few more days, but she didn't get the result she wanted. Finally, she accepted her mother's offer. but she made a condition. "You don't know me from this day forward, so on the farm do not even come near me," said the girl unhappily. "Do whatever you want." The mother waved her hand indifferently. "I've had enough of your antics." So Emily and work began. At work, she never said a word to her mother, as if she didn't exist. The director was a red tape, so he looked for a young employee and began to take care of her. But Emmy remained indifferent to his attention. Then a month later, the boss took her to his office, but even then he failed. "George Wilson, don't waste your time on me," Emily told him. "I know my worth." A little over a year later, Emmy had made enough money to go to the city. She was finishing up her last 2 weeks of work. It was the beginning of summer, and one day an expensive car came by the farm. "Emmy, come on, give me a hand," said the director, running out with some papers. A rich man had come there to look at the horses. The girl reluctantly got up from the table, looked in the mirror, and went outside. "Wow, he has a car," she whistled. "Where from? Why was he so rich?" Emily fixed her hair and walked seductively toward the car. "Hello," she said cheerfully. "Welcome. We love guests." The elderly man looked at the girl carefully. "And you have a treasure island here," he smiled at the stranger. "John Smith." Emily was delighted when she shook his hand. And she called herself. "Aren't you going to show us your shows?" He looked her in the eye. "I will," she laughed. "Come on, come along. Our roads here are not very smooth, so be careful." "I'm not afraid of anything with you," replied John Smith. The guest took Emily under his arm. "Well, you see, I'm ready." The girl showed the visitors the farm for about an hour. Frankly speaking, the guest was only interested in horses, but he was immediately interested in the girl. He had already divorced his ex-wife a year ago, so he was in active search. In general, the girl did not notice how in 3 days, John Smith offered her a job in Boston. It was a victory. "God, Boston," she rejoiced. "I never even thought about it. My dream was another city, and this was practically the capital. Yes, 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 God. I wish I hadn't missed this man." A week later, a man from Smith came to pick Emily up, and she got into an expensive car in front of the whole village and drove off to her new life. "I told you I was going to have a good life," she threw. Not that she threw, but at her mother as she walked her to the car. "Goodbye," Emily said, and slammed the door shut. But as smoothly as the girl had dreamed, she did not succeed. Her man rented her an apartment and provided for her for almost several years. Of course, Emily was happy. But the girl realized that as long as they are not officially signed, the man can leave her at any time. He hardly gave her any cash. Yes, John Smith paid all her expenses, but he dealt with the bills himself. Therefore, Emily had almost no money of her own. "If he comes tomorrow and tells me that's it," she said nervously, "where will I go then? I have no money to live in Boston." The girl used the most varied methods of seduction, but Smith was an experienced womanizer. He was in no hurry. He was satisfied with the fact that he had a young friend. For almost 2 years, Emily did not give up. And finally, her beloved offered her marriage. At last. "How happy I am," she shouted in delight. "Oh my God. You are the best. I hope you'll be satisfied now." "Yes, you shout loudly," he laughed, looking into the girl's eyes. "I am the happiest woman in the world." The girl didn't talk to anyone from the village, so no one knew she had finally made it. The first year she lived in Boston, her mother tried to talk to her, but it was all to no avail. Then Deborah Jones tried a few more times to call from a different number, but her daughter blocked it again. And if it hadn't been for chance, the mother would never have known how she was doing. One day after the wedding, Emily pulled up to the house and got out of the car. She was standing in the street outside her new home. Suddenly, some car labeled taxi stopped beside her. "Hey," Emmy said, someone's voice. "Is that you?" Ben, the girl, was surprised to see a boy from her village. "What are you, working in Boston?" "Well, yes," he answered cheerfully. "What are you doing here?" The guy looked in amazement at the girl's expensive clothes. "And I live here," she replied arrogantly. "Ben, you'll have to excuse me, but I have to go." Emmy quickly jumped into the car and pulled into the yard. The guy couldn't budge. "Wow," he scratched his head. "What? Did she marry a rich guy?" The girl very quickly forgot about the fact that she had met her fellow villager and went about her business. In fact, even though Emily had already become John Smith's official wife, she lived in constant tension. She kept getting the feeling that her husband was going to divorce her. Last week, she overheard two maids talking by accident. I wonder how long this will last, one of them said through a laugh. The last one here lasted about 2 years. You know, I heard that the master lived longest with his third wife, said the second. That's the one by whom he has his first son. He lives in America. Now, he lived with this one for 10 years. Wow, the first one marveled. How did she last so long? I don't know how you can live with him at all, she whispered. He looked at all women the same way. Emily shuddered. She knew she had to do something right away. She wasn't going to lose her husband. But the problem was that the girl was too young. Therefore, how to keep such a sophisticated man, she didn't know. Honey, you work so much. You need to rest. Emmy told her husband one evening. Let's go somewhere. Get a change of scenery. Come on. He agreed easily. Where should we fly, to Boston or Turkey? Of course, to Boston, his wife rejoiced. You promised me for so many years, but never took me there once. We'll fix that. John Smith hugged Emily. We don't have a problem with that, he smiled. 3 days later, they flew to Boston. It was not the first time Smith took Emily when they were not yet officially married. That girl accompanied him on vacation, and in Europe, and Africa, and Taiwan, so she has already seen the world a little. Emily carefully prepared for this trip. She bought a new expensive dress, which her husband has not yet seen. She took her most revealing swimsuit with her. But no matter how hard Emmy tried, her husband occasionally looked at other women with rapt attention. Damn it, swore to herself. What more do you want? I'm going crazy to please him. And he's staring at that blonde at the next table. That night, the girl couldn't take it anymore and gave her husband his first scandal. John, you just do not notice me, she said resentfully. You were always looking at that girl at the next table. Why are you exaggerating? He replied indifferently. I am only interested in my wife. And yesterday you did not even hide the fact that you liked a young brown girl on the beach. Emily wouldn't let it go. What the hell are you talking about? John Smith looked at her sternly. Let's stop this meaningless conversation. But the girl did not stop, and then her husband got angry and left the room. His wife watched him closely. Not an hour later, he was sitting at a table whispering something in the ear of some girl about 25 years old. Oh my God, what have I done? Emily was nervous. What am I supposed to do now? She walked into the cafe and approached her husband. Honey, why don't we go swimming like nothing happened, she said. I've missed you already. All right. John Smith got up from the table and went with his wife to the sea. From that day, Emmy realized that she had to act very carefully. After this incident, she could no longer relax, and her whole family life became a constant struggle. It had been 6 months since Emily had been married. She had everything, but she couldn't be called happy. It was a warm March day when she went to her beautician. The girl was transformed, and Happy was returning home. Near the gate of her house, she noticed some woman. At first, she didn't pay any attention to it, but the closer she got, the more she recognized her mother. Emily decided not to get out of the car. She pressed for the automatic gate to open, but the woman ran up to her window, and the girl had to stop. You didn't tell me you got married, her mother asked her worriedly. I'm still worried. You never cared about me, the daughter replied arrogantly. I'm not going to talk to you for a long time. You've had your look. Now you can go away. Emmy, I haven't done anything wrong to you, protested the mother. You could have at least called and said you were fine. What are you mad about not being invited to the wedding? She looked hatefully at Deborah Jones. Girl, I warned you. I told you I'd make my own life and live well. Well adjusted? Have you done anything for it? And just because I fed and clothed you until you were 19, it means nothing. Emily tried to talk reasonably to her daughter. Mother, thank you for the Chinese pants and the loaf of bread. That's it. Back off. I've got things to do, the girl poked. Why do you do that, Emmy? I don't ask you for anything, do I? Through her tears, the woman uttered. What did you expect? She laughed nervously. Get out of here and forget me forever. Life is a very complicated thing, said the mother with annoyance in her voice. Today you may have everything, and tomorrow you may be left on the street. Fuck you, scolded the girl. You wish that for yourself. Get out of here, or I'll call the guards. They'll explain everything to you in no time. Emily jerked the car sharply, and the woman barely managed to bounce aside. Deborah Jones stared after her daughter and shook her head. God forbid you get all that back, she pronounced, and wandered back the way she had come. She's come to lecture me here. Emmy paced angrily around her room. I have enough problems without her. The girl went downstairs, walked to the kitchen. There, the daily business of the day was simmering. When the landlady entered, everyone quieted down. She spun around, found nothing suitable for a scandal, and went into the living room. "Darling, it's our anniversary today. Let's celebrate it with you," Emily said into the phone in an affectionate voice. "What's our date today?" I missed something, her husband wondered. "Today is exactly 6 months since the best day of our lives," the wife laughed. "We were married exactly 6 months ago." "Oh, how quickly time has flown by." The man marveled. "Well, all right, if you consider it an important date, then let's go out to a restaurant tonight." "Thank you, my love," Emily rejoiced. "Of course, it's very important to us. Besides, I need to walk out my new dress." In the evening, the driver took the couple to a restaurant. John was a fan of fine cuisine, and he liked to eat good food in general. Money allowed him to order the most exquisite dishes. Emily wore a gorgeous red dress. She looked like a passionate beauty. "Wow," the man hugged his wife. "I just now realized how happy I am with you, and this really needs to be celebrated." The couple walked into the restaurant and sat down at the reserved table. Everything was going well. Emily was just happy. But an hour later, a new couple entered the restaurant. The woman was simply dazzling. Her very deep cleavage on her back flaunted some racy details. Emily's husband looked at the stranger and was mesmerized. He hadn't taken his eyes off her all evening. "Can't we go home already?" Through tears, the wife said. "I see you're not at all interested in me." "And I think we could still stay," John Smith said without taking his eyes off the deep cut on the girl's back. "You're just ignoring me," the spouse said angrily. "After all, I am your wife, not that stranger." "You're a woman, Emily. What do you want from me?" The husband said unhappily. "For me to be a leash dog?" "Then no, that's not going to happen." The man got up and left the restaurant. A few minutes later, he returned and paid the bill. "If you want, come home with me. If not, then take a cab," John said calmly to his wife. Emily sat at a table in the restaurant and just sobbed. After about 5 minutes, she came to her senses and walked toward the restaurant exit. Halfway out, she turned sharply and looked hatefully at the girl in the revealing dress. "For fuck's sake," she cursed to herself and walked out of the restaurant. Upset, she returned home, determined to have a serious talk with her husband. "John, could we talk to you?" She hugged her spouse. "First of all, I love you very much. Second, it hurts me so much when you don't look at me, but at others." "Are you jealous?" He laughed. "But it's healthy. Emily, I'm a man, I'm a male, and despite my age, I'm in good shape. So it's natural for me to look at pretty girls." Emily uttered in bewilderment, "Well, what about me?" "Don't I mean anything to you anymore, Emmy?" he replied. "Are you my wife? If you meant nothing to me, then I wouldn't have married you at all. Then you still love me." She embraced her husband with joy. "Of course I do," answered John Smith, and kissed her. "Now your soul is at peace." But Emily had only had enough for a few weeks. After that, she began to feel threatened by all young women again. "I must think of something," the girl persisted, rummaging through her closet. "Should I switch to a maxi?" She tried on one dress. "I look amazing in it." That evening, Emily and her husband went to a concert. Her long dress conquered all of her husband's acquaintances. The girl bathed in attention. Suddenly, across from them, on the balcony, she saw a young woman about 27 years old. Her face was as if crying. The stranger was perfect. The girl looked sharply at her husband. John Smith's face was simply glowing. Emily blackened with anger, her face contorted, and she gloomily looked at everyone spitefully. "How do you like our neighbor on the opposite balcony?" she asked her husband snidely when they got home. "Who was sitting there?" John Smith replied in surprise. "You know I didn't even notice." "John, will you stop lying to me?" the girl shouted. "I've seen the way you've been looking at her all evening." "Emily, are you imagining things again?" Her husband looked at her sternly. "Please calm down, and we'll talk afterward." This was not the last time this would happen. There had been so many such incidents in Emily's life that she had stopped counting them. It had been 3 years since she'd been married to Smith. Jealousy was eating her up more and more. The girl had grown 3 years older, and now it seemed to her that her husband no longer needed her. "Lord, what is this?" She looked in the mirror in horror. "Is it wrinkles?" The girl dropped the little mirror and walked over to the huge mirror on the wall. "What's that wrinkle on my forehead?" Stupefied with shock, she said. "How old I am." The girl quickly dialed a familiar number and arranged to undergo a very powerful treatment today to smooth her skin. "Look at this." Emily poked her finger at the area above her upper lip. And there's a crease forming here. The bags under your eyes. I'm begging you, do something. Stop me getting old. No way. You're so young. Your face looks no older than 18. What are you talking about? I just turned 25 the other day, Emmy said through tears. Who's going to want me now? Don't worry. We'll fix all that now, the master assured her. We'll smooth out all the wrinkles. Remove the bags under your eyes. A couple hours later, Emily looked in the mirror satisfied. That's better, she smiled. That's how I like myself. A very important date was approaching. It was soon to be 3 years since the girl had married John Smith. It was a real anniversary to her. She had worked so hard to keep her family together. It seemed to her that her scandals had not gone in vain, and during this time she had somewhat reined in her spouse. At least he had stopped looking at others so openly. Perhaps his age was already taking its toll, Emily thought. I have maybe another 5 years left, and then I can count on his fortune. Lord, how much strength I have given him. How much of my nerves he has wasted. The spouses decided to celebrate their anniversary in a luxurious country house. And let's have a real ball, the girl suggested. Can you imagine how beautiful all the women will be in gorgeous open dresses? She asked. In open dresses, you say? He scratched his head. Why? I agree. All the guests had been warned that for the anniversary they would need, so to speak, a dress code. The house was specially prepared for the occasion. The ceiling hung festive chandeliers. The large hall was decorated in the Rococo style. Everything looked simply magnificent. The hostess received the guests in a stunning dress, which she sewed herself to order. The guests whispered, "This has never happened before. This is just great. John Smith is beyond the competition." The guests enjoyed the meal, and the ball began. The cavaliers began to ask the ladies to dance. It was noticeable that those present were very excited, trying not to hit the dirt. The master of the house defiantly approached his wife, and they inaugurated the ball with the first dance. Gosh, it's good to have a professional teacher and me to work with, rejoiced Emily. Otherwise, we would have gotten tangled up in our own feet and embarrassed ourselves. After his dance, John couldn't catch his breath for a long time. He decided not to take any more risks and sat down in a luxurious chair, watching the ladies. Suddenly, a young lady, about 19 or 20 years old, with a childish face, entered the hall. She was dressed in a simple silk dress. An unpretentious hairstyle only emphasized the beauty of her appearance. The master of the ball froze, not taking his eyes off her. Choosing the right moment, he approached the stranger and extended his hand. Allow me to introduce myself, lovely creature. What is your name? Amanda, the girl, blushed and accepted her beau's hand. Emily was chatting merrily with some ladies when she suddenly noticed that her husband's chair was empty. She looked around anxiously and saw John telling something to a young lady, and the latter laughing sonorously. Who is that girl? The hostess asked one of the women. I have no idea. I don't know her, she replied. In truth, Emily didn't really care that much who the stranger was. She was intently watching her spouse's every move. He didn't seem to notice anyone around him and looked genuinely happy. My God, has he never settled down? Whispered the hostess of the ball. Emily could hardly contain her fury. At last the dance was over. John kissed his partner's hand with pleasure and whispered something in her ear. The girl flushed at first, then nodded in agreement. His consort came swiftly toward him. Who is this prankster with whom you have been dancing? Why should I? But you're the one who started this ball, and it's customary to dance at a ball, her husband replied calmly, and headed for the champagne table. Emily wanted to add something, but decided to wait for the right moment. All evening she kept her eyes on John, and it seemed that the stranger and he were casting meaningful glances at each other. Unable to bear it, she approached her spouse again. Explain what all this means. Are you flirting with young girls on our anniversary? Emily, please don't start. John looked at her coldly. Let's talk about this later. Don't ruin my mood. The ball continued for a few more hours, and the satisfied guests began to disperse. That was amazing. John, the Cavaliers thanked their host, shaking his hand firmly. Emily Jones, thank you for a real ball, kissed the cheek of the hostess by the ladies. The master of ceremonies was rubbing his hands together, looking at the smartly dressed ladies with interest. Only Emily alone was not happy. She was impatiently waiting for the last guest to leave her house, so that she could tell everything to her husband. The farewell to the guests seemed to last indefinitely. At last the last car started outside the gate, and the servants set about cleaning the hall. John, what is the meaning of all this? Emily looked sternly at her husband. Emmy, you wanted me to have fun at the ball, didn't you? What do you want from me now? He replied coldly. Thank you. I enjoyed it all. Now, I want to rest. Who was that maiden with whom you danced? She wouldn't back down. Who invited her? How should I know? I have invited so many people. Probably someone's daughter, he answered angrily. So you didn't even know her name? Emmy said snidely. I'll never believe it. You've been looking at her the whole holiday. So now she claims even my sight. John Smith said grudgingly. But, the man walked slowly toward the exit. His wife ran after him and shouted something on the way. She was waving her arms in a frenzy and would not calm down for days to come. The husband tried to ignore his wife's tantrums during this time, but it was evident that his patience was running out. Emmy, I'm going to sleep in my room for the time being, John Smith said to her one evening. What nonsense is that? She objected. We are so well together. Emily, did you hear what I said? Her husband looked at her coldly. Between Smith and his wife grew an iceberg. The girl made a new visit to a beauty salon and an elite boutique, but it no longer helped her. After this conversation, her husband had grown cold to her. What should I do now? Emily sobbed. He stopped noticing me at all. She tried new tactics, but she could never get John back in her good graces. John, my love, why don't we go away? I can see that you are very tired, somehow caring wife said to him. Let's go to a resort. I'll accompany you. Emmy. Thank you. He looked at the girl. But your care will sooner finish me than cure. I love you so much, Kitty. I love you so much. She tried to hug him. That's why I want to take care of you. I do not need anything from you. Her husband replied dryly and left. What an old fool. Emily was hysterical. What is he up to? He hasn't said anything to me lately. She had a bad feeling. She began to watch her husband. One day Emily changed into a sports uniform, wore glasses. She wore a strange hat on her head. After her husband left, she got into a cab following his car. Please, the girl said sternly. Just so her driver doesn't see us. John Smith drove into the courtyard of the luxury house. Emily looked at it with surprise. It was a multi-story building, and apparently someone had an apartment here. After all, her husband had rented an apartment for her before she was married. An hour or two later, her husband's car pulled out of the yard and headed for the stables. Oh, shit, Emily scolded. Who lives there? Had he found someone? Judging by the fact that he hasn't spoken to me lately, it's possible. She was in a bad mood. She knew her life as Smith's wife was hanging in the balance. If John had already found someone else, she was in a bad way. Emmy decided to eavesdrop on his conversation sometime. She took out some kind of device and placed it on the door to her husband's room that evening. Well, of course it came to her. I miss you very much too. I'll pick you up at 5 tomorrow and we'll go to a restaurant for some French food. We'll walk around a bit and then we'll come back to your place. Emily wanted to burst in on her husband, but quickly stopped. She was determined to catch him red-handed tomorrow. What she heard shocked her. It was clear that her husband had taken a mistress, which meant that Emily wouldn't have long to live. You old goat, she said angrily, when you die. When they come for you and take you to the other world. All night the girl could not sleep a wink. She urgently needed to do something. But having grown up a little, Emmy began to realize that it would be very difficult to get her husband back. She waited until the next night, hailed a cab, and showed up at the restaurant in her plain clothes. Emily had no doubt that John Smith would bring his new fling here. He'd never been particularly imaginative. It was almost 6 o'clock in the evening when her husband's familiar car showed up outside Legrand's restaurant. Emily held her breath and pressed herself against the cab window. John got out of the car and gallantly offered his hand to the young lady with whom he had danced at the ball. What a scoundrel. The girl couldn't stand it. He's even younger than he is. He himself has sand falling from everywhere, and he still cannot calm down. The stranger was really pretty. She radiated youth, a smile of innocence on her childish face. John took his lady under his arm and led her into the restaurant. A few minutes later, Emily followed them as well. The girl could hardly contain herself. She wanted to pounce on her husband's young mistress. But she knew that would only make things worse. Now she needed to find out how serious were the intentions of her husband towards this person. The lovers were seated at an isolated table, so they did not notice the girl. You don't have to worry about anything, John said sternly to his new woman. Clothes, food, salons, all that is only my concern. By the way, I want to tell you that soon you and I will fly to Paris. I'll show you our house. He bought a house in Paris for his mistress. Oh my God, Emily repeated in fright. So he was serious with her. The girl wanted to run out of the restaurant, but decided to wait a little longer. "Well, what are you, my love?" Embarrassed, said the stranger. "You have done so much for me. I love you so much. I still can't forgive myself that I lied to you then. Well, if I hadn't managed to sneak into your ball, we would never have met, so I'm begging you to forget about it. I found out by accident that there was a ball at your house. I overheard my hosts talking while I was cleaning the parlor. You know, my love, it's like I've got wings behind me. I was determined to get there at any cost, so I had to lie about being the daughter of someone you know. The most important thing is that we are together, and the rest is nothing." John stroked her hand. "Oh my God, she worked as a servant," Emily said in amazement. "John, you're sinking lower and lower." The girl realized she didn't want to listen to any more of their amorous ramblings. Gloomy, she returned home. "What am I going to do now?" Emmy asked herself. "My husband is in love, so I don't matter to him anymore. Of course, maybe in a month or two he'll grow cold to her, and we'll live normally again. But what if he doesn't?" Emily had a hard time imagining what would happen to her if her husband's affair grew into something more. She made the decision that she needed to calm down and just wait. So she endured for almost 3 days, but then the girl just snapped out of it. "You thought I wouldn't find out you had a mistress," she shouted at the top of her voice. "Emmy," her husband told her calmly, "for 3 years of living with you, I have heard nothing but reproaches. You lie. I gave you all my youth. Everything I did was for your sake." The wife screamed in rage. "How dare you treat me like this? You don't have to lecture me here." John Smith looked at her sternly. "Stop it, while I'm still in control. Am I walking away from you?" Emily asked in amazement. "I have given so much of myself to you. How can you be so ungrateful? Are you talking to me about gratitude? Angry husband. But you 3 years as a parasite on my neck sat on my neck. Your jealousy almost drove me crazy, but you want to know the truth. Then you should know that no matter what kind of wife I had, I always had lovers on the side. And if you'd realized that from the beginning, you'd have lived happily ever after with me." "What are you saying?" "Between us, what? It's over," the wife said in shock. "Did you bring me to this?" Smith replied coldly. "I've had enough of this." "How could you do that?" "Cheers," sobbed the girl. "I love you, Emmy. If you knew how many women I've been with, you wouldn't be talking such nonsense." He laughed. "You just sold yourself for my money, and you didn't value your happiness. I beg you, give me a second chance," the wife begged. "I promise I'll do it." "Emmy, do not lie," said the husband in anger. "I think our conversation is over. Are you just going to leave me like this, dumbfounded? Girl, do you even realize what you are doing, old fool? It's all right. I'll take my share from you. You owe me compensation for stealing my youth." "I didn't take anything from you," he shouted. "Ungrateful beasts. I was going to give you an apartment and enough money for one last time, but now you're going to leave this house with what you came in with." Smith quickly grabbed his cell phone and dialed the right number. "He's going to block all of my wife's accounts right now, take everything away from her, and start divorce proceedings. You just threw me out on the street with nothing." Emily couldn't believe it. "You can take your bag and only the clothes you're wearing. In 5 minutes, I'm expecting you to go out," John said coldly. "Take off all your jewelry and watch. Don't steal anything. My guard will definitely check you out." Emily was so shocked that she couldn't even say a word. She slowly wandered to her room, put her papers in her bag, and took one last look. A guard approached her and searched her. "All clear," Johnny said, turning to the host. "This is for you for sharing 3 years of your life with me," pronounced the husband and slipped something into the girl's hand. The gate closed behind Emily. Smith was a man of principle, and she only now realized it. The girl opened her palm. There lay 10,000. What a prick, she reprimanded. "I don't even have enough to rent an apartment." Emily was lost, wandering somewhere. She just didn't know what she was going to do now. She had never had anything. Everything she lived on had always belonged to her husband. The girl had been wandering around the city of Boston for several hours when it began to get dark. She saw herself standing at the bus station. Emily realized that she had nowhere else to go but to her mother's house. She bought herself a ticket and boarded the shuttle bus. "What's going to happen to me now?" she sobbed. "Where am I going to live now?" It was about 11 o'clock when Emmy knocked on the familiar gate. The village was completely silent. Even the young people were already hiding in their houses. Who was out there? A light came on and Deborah Jones appeared on the porch. "It's me," Emily replied quietly. The woman stepped out into the yard in amazement. Standing before her was her daughter. The mother couldn't believe her eyes. "What do you want here?" she asked dryly. "Why did you come here?" "Are you going to keep me outside like this?" said the daughter unhappily. "Well, come in," replied Deborah calmly. "We'll spend the night tonight, and tomorrow morning we'll talk to you." After a life of luxury, Emmy lay down in her old bed. Tears streamed from her eyes. Maybe he'll change his mind yet, she dreamed. In a month he'll dump his Amanda Wilkins and come for me. Yeah, that's right. I just have to wait a little while. "So why did you come to see me?" Mother asked in the morning. "What? Did your rich man kick you out?" "No," Emily replied angrily. "John and I decided to renew our relationship and live apart from each other for a month. John likes romance, so he came up with the idea. He wants to come visit me here, as if it were the first time." Couldn't he get you an apartment in Boston?" Deborah Jones hesitated. "I understand he has a lot of money. The rich like to recreate past events," replied the daughter arrogantly. "He found me here, not in Boston." Well then, let him rent you an apartment here." Deborah Jones didn't believe her. "It'll be practically free for him here." "He wants me to live in your house," Emily said angrily. "He wants things to be realistic. And who is he?" "Exactly," the woman said angrily. "This is my house, and I make my own rules, and your presence doesn't fit in here at all. You wanted me to be happy. You just have to be patient for a month, and he will take me away from here." The girl looked at her mother angrily. "I realize you're talking nonsense, but okay, you can stay in my house for a month," her mother finally agreed. "But remember, I don't care what your husband wants. I'm the one who sets the rules here." While her mother was tending to the garden, Emily discreetly took her cell phone and called her husband. "Hello, darling," she said as if nothing had happened. "How are you? How are you doing, Emmy?" "What's all this drama for?" came an angry voice in the receiver. "I told you everything yesterday. Don't get your hopes up. It's over between us." But something the girl wanted to say when the phone went off. "Old jerk, we'll see about that," she said angrily. Her mother left for work, and Emily was completely immersed in her thoughts. She needed to come up with a plan to get her husband back. Naturally, she couldn't stay in the village, and she didn't want to. She hid her remaining money. "Oh shit," the girl was cursing. In the refrigerator, "What kind of food is this?" She opened the lid of the pot and sniffed. Emily barely fried herself some scrambled eggs and went to bed. In the evening, her mother came home from work. "I hope with your big money you'll be able to eat on your own," she looked at her daughter. "I'm on a diet now," Emmy said over the loud noises in her stomach. "I need to lose about 4 pounds. Deborah Jones didn't answer her. She immediately realized that something about the whole thing was wrong. It was about 12 when some rustling was heard in the kitchen. Deborah Jones woke up. "Did some thief break in?" she whispered fearfully. "Scary, but we should check it out." The woman cautiously crept into the kitchen and turned on the light. Emily was sitting at the table, shoveling something into her mouth. "Diet, you say?" The mother grinned. She left her daughter alone and went back to sleep. The next morning, Deborah Jones stayed home. It was the weekend, and it was her shift. The woman baked pancakes, boiled borscht, and went to the vegetable garden to work. Emily was still asleep. She hadn't eaten normally in days, so she woke up feeling very hungry. Sneaking into the kitchen, she poured herself some borscht and ate with great pleasure. Then Emmy saw the cell phone on her mother's desk. She must have forgotten it. "This is a real stroke of luck," rejoiced her daughter. Emily dialed a familiar number. Her husband didn't answer for a long time. Finally, she heard his voice. "You again?" he said unhappily. "Apparently this is your number. What do you want?" "Kitty, I missed you so much," Emily replied affectionately. "Don't you love me at all?" "Emmy, I thought you understood," he shouted angrily. "I'll call you myself if I need to. Now leave me alone." He hung up. The girl sobbed. She understood perfectly well that it would be very difficult for her to get her husband back. A week passed. Emily still stole food from her mother, and she pretended not to notice anything. The woman began to suspect that her daughter was not doing as well with her husband as she had told her. The girl. She never spoke to her mother, as she said. "I'll wait a month," Deborah Jones told herself, "and then let her go wherever she wants to go." It was a warm June day, and the woman was at work. Suddenly, Deborah Jones's cell phone rang. She saw an unfamiliar number, but she picked up the phone nevertheless. "Emmy," someone said. "Where do I send your divorce papers?" "That's it. I'm no longer your husband, so don't call again. I'm going to block this number of yours. And don't even think about blackmailing me. You've wasted so much of my nerves. Any money or property is out of the question. I don't advise you to sue. Don't waste money. You'll lose. So all's fair. What you came into my house with, you left with. If it weren't for your arrogant and horrible temper, you could have made money off our divorce. As it is, you're left with nothing. Goodbye. Deborah Jones could not utter a word. She suspected that Emmy and her husband were in trouble, but that they were divorcing was surely too much. All right, now I'll give you a hard time, her mother said in anger. What a proud liar. You'll work for me, and you'll learn to clean the house. That evening, Deborah Jones decided to say everything to her daughter. Well, Emmy, don't you want to tell your mother the truth? She came into her room. What do you want from me? The daughter said in surprise. I have told you everything already. Did you think I wouldn't find out anything? Deborah Jones was angry. Emmy, stop making a fool of me. Go ahead and tell me all about what you've been pestering me about. Don't worry, shouted the daughter. I'll be out of here in a month. And you won't see me again. You won't, her mother answered her. Emmy, stop playing comedy. Do you think I'm going to stay in this hole? The latter shouted furiously. You don't know me very well. For my trouble, I know you too well, replied Deborah Jones calmly. Stop lying. Did your husband kick you out of the house? Who told you such nonsense? The girl was amused. You can't understand the life of rich people. It's you who live here like a herd. You drove your husband away, continued the mother. Who could get along with someone like you? What do you think you're doing? Emily shouted. Who are you anyway? And what do you know about me? Everything, replied the mother briefly, and that your husband kicked you out of the house because of your bad temper. You and him are no longer together, Emmy. And what's left? You have nothing, and you have no money. But have you and your gossip here lost your heads? The girl would not give up. How could such a thing even be thought of? Emmy, her mother said to her at last, is your husband officially divorced from you? He called me today. You must have been talking to him from my phone. That's why he thought it was you. I know all about it, that you're never coming back to Boston, that he'll never take you back, that you have nothing. He asked for an address to send the divorce papers to. Daughter. Is this the end? The mother said. Who the hell are you to judge me? Emily yelled hysterically. Don't you know anything about us at all? Today he divorced me, and tomorrow he'll take me back to his place. Your games are over, her mother sighed. You only came here because you have nowhere else to go. I could leave your house even now. The girl arrogantly began to throw something into her bag. I won't be lost without you, the mother said. No one is keeping you here, she pointed with her hand to the door. But remember, if you leave here now, you won't be coming back. The girl stopped. She turned around and walked slowly to her room. And another thing, her mother looked at her. If you stay here, you will live by my rules. And that means doing chores and getting a job to support yourself. I'm not going to let you loiter any longer. We'll see about that. Emily whispered angrily. I won't put up with you. She slammed the door to her room defiantly, burst into tears, and collapsed on the bed. So he divorced me after all, she said through her tears. Maybe he'll change his mind and come back for me. Damn mother found out about everything. I mustn't let it show that I'm dependent on her now. Let her work her own farm. And I won't. We'll see who's who. Deborah Jones sat down on the sofa. The woman realized that if she indulged her daughter again, she would be of no use to her. I'd rather be a good mother to God than to Emmy, she said. I'm not getting off her again from this day forward. Either she'll finally learn something, or she'll go to waste. There'll be nothing in the middle. I've tried this for so many years. The next morning, the woman got up early for work, walked into her daughter's room, who was still asleep. While you are at home, the tomatoes in the vegetable garden and in the shed have disappeared. Put things in order, the mother sternly ordered. Are you out of your mind? Screamed at her daughter in anger. I will do nothing. Then have you out of the house by the time I come, replied Deborah Jones coldly. I've warned you. The way you used to live doesn't concern me. You are now living in my house. So either you obey or get out. The girl shouted something after her, but her mother did not listen to her. She took her bag and went to work. Deborah Jones had not been herself all day. She felt sorry for her daughter, of course, but she had to stay cool. Let her be thankful I'm still feeding her, she thought. She's never spent a penny on me in her life. Even when she lived rich, Emmy never thought of her mother. Here, let her make it up for herself now. It was about lunchtime when the girl rose grudgingly. She ate the cabbage pie with great relish and began to think what she should do next. I'll just go and see, she muttered to herself as she went out into the vegetable garden. I won't do anything to her. Emily looked around the tomato plantation and turned pale. The mess among the bushes, and with a sigh of relief, went to her room. Wait, she thought. You need it. You pick it yourself. All day the girl lay in bed, continuously watching TV. In the evening her mother came home from work. What is this? Heard the daughter like thunder mother's voice. Emmy, come here quickly. What do you want? Shouted the girl unhappily from her room. Deborah Jones came into her, seized her by the arm, and dragged her into the kitchen. There are no servants here, she shouted. Everyone cleans up after themselves here. The woman poked her finger at the dirty dishes on the table. Fuck you. If you have to clean up, you clean up, Emily reprimanded. The woman quickly ran into her daughter's room, grabbed her bag, and pulled her daughter outside by the arm, glaring angrily at her. Get out of my house. Get out of here, she shouted. Your foot will never set foot in my house again. Emily snapped at her for another long moment, picked up her bag, and went somewhere else. But there was nowhere to go. It was starting to get dark outside. The girl was frightened. Where am I going to live now? She sobbed. What if someone kills me here at night? Lord, what am I going to do now? Emmy spent the worst night of her life. She sat on a bench near her mother in the yard. By morning, she fell asleep on it. I told you to get out of here, she heard Deborah Jones' angry voice above her in the morning. Where am I supposed to go? Emily cried. I have no one but you. What has gotten through to you at last? Her mother said to her. You are only just now remembering it. I was so scared this night, the girl said quietly. All right, I'll clean up after myself and do the work you tell me to do. Deborah Jones stood silently, not knowing what to say to her. She didn't really believe that Emmy could change, but she felt sorry for her daughter. Okay, come on in, she said quietly. I hope you'll wash the dishes and clean up the barn today. Okay, the girl nodded her head. The mother left for work, and the daughter hurried into the house. This night proved to be a turning point for her. The fear of staying on the streets had shown her that something needed to change in herself. Emily decided that she would stay with her mother for now, and then, when she had earned some money, she would go to Boston. She hoped her husband would run out of romance and fall in love with her again. Aunt Deb, they say Emmy's back, a tall, tanned guy asked the woman. How is she? Oh, nothing. Just had her fate tested, so the hubris is off her. You can talk to her normally now, smiled the milkmaid. Maybe she'll talk to me too, he blushed and lowered his eyes. Alex Galen was Emily's classmate. For as long as he could remember, he'd always loved her, but the girl never noticed him. She never even said hello to him. And when the guy found out that Emmy married some rich man, his dream died. He never got married after that. Alex, you're a nice guy, Emmy's mother looked at him. But knowing my daughter, I'd wish you a better girl. She's a hard girl to deal with. Aunt Deb, I've known Emmy since she was a little girl. I love her. I can't help it, he said and turned away. Good for her. Let her recover a little more from her luxurious life. Then you can come visit us, the woman suggested and patted the boy on the shoulder. For the first week of her new life, Emily spoke to her mother through gritted teeth. She did her best to keep her cool. The fear of being on the streets again helped her do that. But at the end of the first week, Emily did give her mother a scandal. Are you kidding me? She yelled in a frenzy. I already wash my own dishes every day. What more do you want? Emmy, do you like to eat? So from tomorrow on, let's cook on your own, Mother said sternly. As long as you're not working, you'll help me around the house. What am I, your servant? Cried Emmy in a rage. And do you think it could be any other way? Deborah Jones grinned. There's no one here to clean up after you, and no one to cook either. You'll learn to cook at the same time. You're out of your mind, the girl wanted to tell her mother to her face, but stopped herself. What am I going to cook? I can't do anything but scramble eggs. Well, I guess you can handle fried potatoes, smiled the mother. I have faith in you. That's it. I've got to go to work. God, how am I supposed to put up with you? Scolded Emily after her mother left. Today, Emmy's assignment from her mother was to do laundry and fry potatoes for dinner. Well, What is it? The girl picked up some jar labeled Palmyra in surprise. How do you wash with this? She opened a new jar with difficulty, and so poked at the paste with her fingers. Ugh, it's gross. She was indignant. Is it really possible to wash clothes with this? The girl took half a bucket of hot water off the stove, poured it into a large basin. God, what kind of Middle Ages do they have here? She was angry. They're still doing laundry here by hand. Emily turned down the water, threw in half a can of paste, threw all the laundry in the basin, and retired to her room. After about 3 hours, she remembered her laundry and walked over to the basin. What is this? She looked at her yellow blouse in horror. Where did that blue stain come from? Lord, it's all stained. The large amount of product and the too hot water had caused all of the almost clothes to water paint. What the hell, cussed the girl. How can anyone even live here? She stared in shock at the rag-like laundry hanging on the wire, scratched her head, and went into the house. It was Emily's own fault. You shouldn't have made me work. Emmy excused herself. It was about 4 o'clock. The girl went to the kitchen, brought a bucket of potatoes, began to peel them. Well, I've peeled the potatoes. What am I going to do with it now? Perplexed, she asked. How do you even fry them? Emily tried to cut the potatoes with a knife, but they slipped out of her hands and fell to the floor. How do they do that? She was angry. They're so slippery. They're impossible to cut. The girl spotted a small axe in the kitchen and hit the potato with all her might. That's it. That is, Emmy rejoiced as the potato shattered into pieces. Now, I'm going to make it. She chopped up the potatoes in big chunks and threw them into the skillet. She poured oil into it, put the lid on, and went to her room. She realized it when there was a smell of burning in her room. It must have been about 2 hours. She ran out into the kitchen. It was filled with puffs of black smoke. Oh my God, rushed the girl to the stove. What's going to happen now? Emmy opened the door. When her mother appeared in the wicket, the woman looked anxiously at her daughter. Emmy, what's the matter with you? She asked worriedly. Is it all your fault? Emily pounced on her mother. You told me to fry potatoes. You know I can't cook, don't you? The woman rushed into the kitchen and brought out a skillet, and in it were potatoes burned to blackness. Quickly, she poured cold water over the pan and shook her head. She was about to go into the house when she noticed the laundry on the rope. My God, what have you done? The woman uttered in shock. That's my robe and exit dress. And just where does that girl get her hands from? Emily was ready for a fight. She was sure her mother would give her a scandal, but to her surprise, Deborah Jones said nothing, quickly prepared dinner, and went to her room in silence. A week passed, and Emily finally learned how to fry potatoes. She even took a swing at borscht. It's really good, too. Her mother dipped her spoon into the red liquid with big chunks of cabbage. You're just great. The girl kept struggling, but despite all her failures, her mother praised her for her work. Clever daughter, said the mother, all the plums collected. And now let's make compote. Emily tried to ward off these thoughts, but more and more often she thought that maybe she didn't have to go back to Boston. Emmy, what are you doing? She said to herself. Do you want to spend all your youth in this dump? What her mother said one evening, we've got girls starting to go on vacation. They need to be replaced. If you want, you can work for a couple months, but not until October at the latest. And you'll have money for personal expenses. Dom Halsaba. The girl wanted to refuse at first, but after a little thought, decided to accept her offer. That way I'll be able to save up for Boston and finally get away from here, she thought to herself. Emily accepted her mother's offer. She accepted the offer and they started going to work together. It was Friday when mother and daughter were coming home one day. Something in town didn't work out for you, the women gathered gossip on the street. Judging by the fact that you came home, your rich man left you, they laughed. Emily drew in a full breath and was about to tell everyone to go to hell, when her mother made a sign with her hand. Dusha, shut your mouth, you stink too much, Deborah Jones said coldly. Your sick fantasy is of no use to anyone here. Emily looked at Deborah Jones in amazement. For the first time in her life, she noticed concern on her mother's part. Thank you, she said in the evening. I didn't expect you to stand up for me. Emmy, well, I'm your mother. Deborah Jones looked at her. It's my duty to protect my daughter. That day something broke in Emily. The girl felt as if she could breathe easier. The next day she stood up. Happy Mom. Let me help you. She approached the woman as she pulled the heavy bucket. Thank you. The mother smiled too. Let's do it together. It's very heavy. Deborah Jones noticed a change in her daughter. Like a child, she was excited about this and that. "Why don't we bake your favorite cake this weekend?" her mother once suggested to her daughter. "Shall we?" The girl agreed. "Remember how I as a child whisked homemade sour cream, and then the cream licked off my fingers? How delicious it was to me then." Emily, of course, never got rid of her temper, but she began to notice that it became easier and easier to control herself. Emmy learned to keep silent, and in time the girl realized what incredible advantages from this she now had. She was not hurt by the neighbors' harsh words, nor annoyed by the cows on the farm, nor frightened by her work. "Emmy, hello." Once the girl heard someone's voice behind her. "And Alex, hello." Smiling, she answered. "You're probably wondering why I came home too. And why did my rich husband kick me out of the house?" The girl looked intently into his eyes. "No," simply answered the guy. "I do not care where and with whom you lived. What do I care about that?" Emmy looked at the guy without taking her eyes off. She wanted to find some deceit in him, but soon realized that the guy spoke sincerely. "What about you, Alex?" she finally asked. "Already married, I guess? Do you have kids?" No, he shook his head negatively. "I haven't met my one and only." "Why not?" Emmy laughed. "Do you have too many demands? Is a man loved for something external?" He looked at her seriously. "For the face, for the figure," Emily smiled. "And the rest is nothing." "I don't agree with you." Alex Galen looked the girl straight in the eyes. "Truly love is always just like that." The guy turned around and left. Emily looked after him for a long time. "What is this love for?" sighed the girl. "It only causes problems. You should not live with your heart, but with your head." The girl had been working on the farm for about a month. When at lunchtime Alex appeared on the farm again. The guy was a tractor driver in the collective farm and sometimes brought fodder to the cattle. His main duty was to work on the tractor in the field. "Alex, hello." Deborah Jones was happy. "How are you doing? Can you give me a little?" "Everything is all right," the guy replied cheerfully. "Now they've started harvesting corn." "I see. So you're pretty busy right now," said Emmy at her mother. "And you wanted something?" Seeing the disappointment on the woman's face, the boy asked. "Yes, I wanted to hire you to hammer up a fence," she replied. "We have such holes in our factories, then dogs, then someone's boars. They're always climbing into the garden." "Okay," he said simply. "I'll do it. Let's do it next weekend." Deborah Jones cheered up. She thanked the boy and he went off to unload the silage for the cows. "What a nice guy," said her mother with a smile. "He doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke, he doesn't go out." "Why?" Emily stared at her mother in amazement. "Only he's been in love with you for a long time." The mother looked into her daughter's eyes. "Would you two make a good couple?" "Mom, would you?" replied her daughter angrily. "Or do you really think I'll stay in this village? And what do I need him for? I'm going to Boston soon." "All right," said the mother calmly. "The main thing is that he will fix the fence." The weather was clear. It was early August. At 9 o'clock, someone knocked on the gate. Emily looked out and saw Alex, waved to him. The boy came into the yard. It was obvious that he was worried. "Emmy, hi." Alex was happy to see the girl. "I came to work with you. What I need will take a couple of hours." "Could you help me?" Alex, the mother, asked her daughter. "Maybe there are some boards that need to be held there." The girl agreed, and she and the guest went to the end of the vegetable garden. Alex easily used the tools. He became very hot, and he took off his t-shirt. "Wow," Emily thought. "What kind of body does he have? Pumped muscles and strong arms. And he's all right." "Emmy, hold this right here." A guy's voice interrupted her thoughts. "I'll go around the other side. You're so good at it." The girl couldn't stand it and praised Alex. "Yes, every man can handle it," he laughed, revealing snow-white teeth. "What do you usually do here in the village? Do you go out for a walk or to the club for a disco? By the way, does it still work?" "Yes, probably 2 years ago it was closed," Alex answered sadly. "So there is really nothing for local young people to do here. I read books in the evenings." "You like to read?" Emmy was surprised. "Frankly speaking, I didn't expect from you." "Well, what do you like?" "Well, I like classics and science fiction," he answered and added Ray Bradbury, the Strugatsky brothers, Roger Zelazny. "Well, tell me something," Emily suddenly suggested. Let's do Bradbury. All right. Let's start with the classics. 451 degrees Fahrenheit, he laughed. I think this book reflects very well what will happen to us if we do not develop, do not read, stop striving for something new. The boy and the girl had finished mending the fence, but their discussion about the book was still going on. Emmy brought them some compote and put a plate with pies in front of Alex. You understand, Alex said, biting into a pie. There must be novelty in everything. It is the law of life. If you don't evolve, sooner or later there will be a failure. The famous second law of thermodynamics also speaks about it in a closed system. Entropy, that is, chaos, begins to increase. And what do you think? Does it apply to everything? Emily marveled. Yes, even human relationships, confirmed the guy. If at least one of the partners doesn't grow, chaos will inevitably ensue. So my marriage to John was doomed from the start, Emily thought. After all, he's as stagnant as ever. He doesn't need any change in his life. No books he's never read, no uninteresting movies he's never watched. God, how did I ever live with him all these years? Oh, are you finished already? Deborah Jones said cheerfully as she entered the yard. What a good job, Alex. I'll get the money for you right away. I don't need anything, said the boy excitedly. Besides, Emmy and I ate pies and talked for a long time. Wow, said the mother. And about what? About books. Emily couldn't help herself. Alex told me so many interesting things today. Well, I have to go, Alex said, heading for the gate. Alex, you come to us if you need anything, the girl said unexpectedly. I like talking to you. The mother looked at her daughter, perplexed. She noticed the glint in her eyes. You were right, she sighed. Alex is a good guy. Why didn't I notice before? Mom, please, hurry up. Emily yelled into the phone. I already can't. Tauzik, I'm on my way, her mother answered her, out of breath. Deborah Jones flew into her daughter's house. Emily was in heat, barely sitting in her chair. She waved a hand over her face. Mom, let's hurry up, the girl asked. Alex is coming to get me now. The grandmother took the 3-year-old girl in her arms and kissed her. You are my treasure. Deborah hugged her granddaughter. My favorite girl. Finally, her husband's car showed up outside the yard. Alex took off like a hurricane. My darling kitty. He gently lifted his wife. Come on. We need to get to the car. Alex, I'm probably going to give birth right here, the girl wailed, clutching her stomach. Don't worry, we'll make it in time, smiled the guy. Mom, I'll call you as soon as I arrive. Deborah and her granddaughter waved to the departing car. 3 hours later, the phone rang. Mom, congratulations on your grandson, Alex said through tears. 20 minutes ago, our Nicky was born. The son kicked out the village mother in a snowstorm. A year later, when he came to visit her, Emily lovingly stroked the smooth side of the glass cylinder with pickles, leaned over it, inhaled the pleasant aroma of fresh dill, garlic, cherry leaves, which she was sure to add to her preparations. Now she would close the next batch with metal lids, roll it up, put it to cool, and then take it to the cellar to the shelves. She thought for the 100th time that this year there was a good harvest of vegetables in the vegetable garden, and she herself would not go hungry in the winter. And she had prepared supplies for her son Archie in the city. Behind her back, in the corner of the summer kitchen, there was a faint sound and some inarticulate mumbling. It was her mother, Helen, awake, peacefully dozing, whispers, smells, the gurgling of pickles on the stove. A sturdy couch with a pile of old blankets and pillows had been there since ancient times. Now she had dragged Ellen there on her own to keep the old woman in sight. Although she was not quite ancient, only a little over 70 years old, she had not been on her feet for 5 years. The doctors then only waved their hands. We do not observe any physical abnormalities, no stroke or other symptoms that could give an order to the legs not to walk. There is no history of any. And they keep their lower limbs on their own. Your mother's more frail body refuses to fulfill its physiological purpose. Grandmother Helene is a well-known personality in the village. Back in the days when the Soviet kolkhoz ruled everything in the village, not a single matter of importance could be done without her ubiquitous nose. A small woman, just like Thumbelina, in appearance and in character. She could run the farm. Nobody drove the cows to the field for haying better than her. The men could never keep up with her. When she digs potatoes in her vegetable garden, people marvel. They are still checking where to put the tubers for drying. Ellen already has dry and even potatoes in bags, waiting for their hour. Lubia even called her our eternal engine. Where did they dig up such a term in those times? Peasants can't keep up with science. Someone from the visiting business travelers dropped this nickname. After the perky little girl, everyone picked it up at once. The village perpetual motion machine could not cope with the loads overnight. It fell out of working order, as if the battery inside had run out of charge. Emily herself was a tall and statuesque woman. Not a particularly fit woman, but she wasn't exactly overweight. She was all juicy, appetizing, tall, with huge blue eyes of all shades of cornflower, and a kerchief always tied around her, covering a mop of light, thick hair. Spoiled Max in the army and clothes. In the old days they would say, "Here she is, a real American beauty." But Emily didn't care for these compliments. She would pick up her mother, light as a fluff ball, and drag her into the cradle of an old motorcycle. She handled that mechanical inheritance of her father's. Her father has long gone to the other world, but managed to accustom his daughter to friendship with the iron helper. And the countryside motorcycle a godsend, something to transport small things, to the store to run to get provisions, 1 centner of sugar for jams and compotes, and to buy on wheels a nice thing, to solve all sorts of problems. So now the street did not keep my mother in the 4 walls of the house. To the river to refresh in the cool water, while Mom on a blanket in the shade of willow will sit. Together they went to a distant berry plot with strawberries, red and black currants. Also in the company of Ellen. Emily wanders along the rows with a bow, Mom near the motorcycle on a blanket buckets with the harvest guarding. There, both women are not in grief alone. They have their own blood appoint at their side. It's good to be alive. Infirm Matthew didn't see his beloved husband. He would have been sad. He burned to death 6 years ago from a simple flu. His immune system had already weakened with age, and the disease had a dead grip on him. He was almost 20 years older than his wife, and still remembered how their collective farm had been raised from the ruins after World War II, how they had plowed and sown almost by hand, without machinery. Matvey first saw the eyes of his young wife Helen among the cows. The sometimes capricious milk suppliers obeyed this impudent girl unconditionally. The man then thought that it seemed that the young lady was afraid of her soul and diligently gave her everything that had gathered in their uterus. There was no time for dating and courtship in that hard time. At the evening in the village club, Matthew spoke to the locals as a specialist sent from a neighboring, more prosperous region to help. He called for victorious labor, inspired to exploits. After his speech, the girl herself came up to him and extended a small, strong palm. "You said everything right, comrade. Who, if not us, will raise the farm to new heights? Let's get acquainted. I'm Ellen. If you need help, please contact me." By the way, 40-year-old Matthew was very handsome and smiling, had that very male charm which the female sex will never pass indifferently. All the widows in the village were already looking at him with interest, but he did not notice anyone and nothing around him. As he came out of the club with Helen to walk her home and discuss the affairs of the collective farm, he fell in love definitively and irrevocably. His feelings were mutual. His soul was not embarrassed neither by the difference in age, nor by the sarcastic sneers of his comrades. Little girl chose an old man as her soulmate. A small gold mine, but a dear one. To the visiting father turned out to be, "Look, turrets, and the girl is spinning our collective farm leader." Matthew and Ellen got married right after the end of harvesting. The traveling specialist had no place of his own. Ellen's parents did not say a word against their love. He came to the Primakovs in a small house of his wife's parents and lived there for the rest of his life. Together parents, and in time spent the last journey. Next to the woman he loved, everything seems easier and simpler. After 3 years of marriage, they had Emily. I wish her parents had a brother or sister later. Yes, Ellen's doctors didn't advise her to take any more risks. There were delegations from the maternity hospital to the pediatric ward. The baby was born a girl giant, almost 60 centimeters of height and 5 kilograms of weight. The doctors were saying, "We have you, mommy, a total female anomaly. Such tiny babies do not give birth to such large babies. We could send your information to the Guinness Book of Records." Matthew and Ellen only smiled, so our father is 2 meters tall, a slouch in the shoulders. We have someone to give our daughter a big birth. Subsequently, no giant Emily was not marked. She grew and developed like all other peers. Beauty in her father, energy in her mother. It was a strange combination. Now she was approaching 50 years of age. And the fact that I was endowed with beauty from my parents and God, I never recognized it. She always walked past mirrors in passing, not looking into them unnecessarily, at dances and festivals in the shadow of other village beauties. One joy in the world's son Arson, who lives in the regional center. Now she will deal with cucumbers, zucchini and cherry jam. Mom, thank God, with a bright mind and good memory, word and advice will always support. She would come and stroke her head, stare into her eyes with her clear gaze. I thought to myself that the fact that her mother's legs had failed was pain, hopelessness. That the hour of her husband Matthew came to the graveyard to come to terms. A woman in love with this loss could not. Her legs refused. But grooms on the now empty land for her without her beloved by her side to tread. Emily picked up her mother with a familiar motion, pulling her by the arm. Now I'll take you, my good one. We'll have tea afterward. I got your favorite cookies from the store. Helene put her arms around her daughter's neck, pressed her cheek against her warm shoulder. My poor girl. Why did you have such a heavy cross of struggle and loneliness in this life, forever giving your heart to one single man? Why have you suffered such anguish of womanly longing? Images from 30 years ago swam before Emily's eyes. In the late 80s, the Soviet Union was like a colossus on legs of clay. Dusty, hot rural summers, the kolkhoz, which had given a lot of resources, could barely cope with the tasks. People fled to the city. Physical labor in the field was no longer the pride of the toilers. After the death of the communist leader, the country changed several rulers. The last one declared glasnost in the fight against drunkenness. It became unclear how to go on living. The collective farm managed to harvest watermelons and melons. A student group was sent from the city. They settled them in a school. No money was promised. The collective farm was impoverished, but they promised to feed them in the club so that the young people would not get bored. In the evenings, they played movies and organized discos. Emily had just finished school. She caught a cold when the students went swimming in the river. When it was time to apply for university, she dreamed of becoming a biologist. But the girl came down with a fever over 40. They wanted to put her in the hospital, but Ellen said that she would cure her daughter herself. At the family council, it was decided that she should not go to the army, but work in the village for a year, and the next year to enroll. A suitable vacancy was found: quickly assistant cook in the student canteen. 2 women did not have time to serve 50 people 3 times a day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The townspeople were squeamish about rubbing the utensils with napkins, asking to wash the dishes again. They were in desperate need of a nimble and savvy helper. Here's my revision of the text, following your instructions. Emily recovered from her illness a week after the students arrived in the village. She had not yet met any of them. When Ellen's friend complained that she and her partner had been knocked off their feet in the dining hall, Ellen remarked gravely, "I'll be of more use in the fields and on the ruins of our once prosperous farm. And let Emily go and help. You needn't let her sit at home all summer. She's quite well now." The work in the canteen was marked by a bright, extraordinary event. The girl at the new workplace on the first day went with a tray full of glasses with compote. Before lunch, yes, on a small puddle at the table slipped. Set on a tray of fragile dishes flew to the floor, as in slow motion. A few seconds later, a bright maroon stain blurred, dotted with small glasses. Emily rushed to collect them in her apron, so that the students already at the tables wouldn't cut themselves. The treacherous piece of glass entered her hand so quickly that she didn't even feel the pain at first. Just above her palm, a purple stain began to blur. Droplets that looked like red rowan berries dripped onto the floor. Emily felt dizzy. The crowd gathered around her was shrugged off by some guy. "Get out of the way. My dad's a surgeon. I know how to provide expert care for wounds this deep. Get the first aid kit." What's a first aid kit in a village canteen? A bottle of iodine, an empty bandage packet, small narrow tubes of plaster rolled up like a roll, analgin tablets. That was all the medical stock. Seeing that the first aid kit would not help, the boy sharply pulled off his light-colored cotton shirt and tore it into a bandage. Carefully took out the glass that had caught the end in the girl's arm, treated the wound with iodine, and wrapped a cloth around it. "That's it. You'll get to the local paramedic in peace now, and I'll walk you there. Let's get acquainted, shall we?" My name is Vincent." Emily looked up at her healer. Tall, slender. The face of an intelligent city boy with gray, intelligent, age-inappropriate eyes. He looks at her directly, openly, with a smile. Vincent is already holding out his hand to walk together to the village nurses' station. He's even going to skip lunch for the occasion. He'll be hungry for the rest of the evening because of her. Some fellow was already holding out to Vincent the plaid shirt he was wearing over his t-shirt. The unwilling doctor deftly pulled it over his strong torso and smiled at the student. "I'll have your closet back to you in an hour." "Thanks, friend, helped out." "I don't care." "I have to change," Emily told her savior. She thought to herself, he's nothing like our local guys. Clean, neat, polite. Not like Greg and her high school boyfriend. Shirt always open, dirty pants, all stained, cigarette in the corner of his thin, predatory lips. What kind of a groom is he? In vain they were already matched with each other in the village. "No offense, but my favorite Max refused my offer to dine with me," Vincent said. "I'll hand you over to your village doctor. Then we'll go." That's a fine word. Aesculapius, Emily thought, at a loss. One must keep one's ear to the ground with these city folk. Always they have words abstruse, quotations from books, and she had never held other printed editions in her hands, except for fiction from the school curriculum and a large colorful book in the world of fauna and flora. After that book, and she had a dream to become a biologist and study the animal world. But for the time being, these bright prospects were pushed away from her for a whole year because of the unfortunate bronchitis. They walked in silence to the nurse's station. Vincent didn't ask her any questions, seeing that she occasionally wrinkled her nose in pain. The paramedic in the office praised the man who'd been next to the injured waitress. "Look how skillfully the wound is treated. Who was able to do it so clearly?" "I did the best I could, without false modesty," Vincent announced. "I come from a family of hereditary surgeons. My father, mother, grandfather, it's as if they were all born with a scalpel in their hands. It would be foolish for me not to have basic first aid skills." After handing Emily over to the medical officer as promised, the boy bowed courteously and disappeared out the door. Emily could only look at him with annoyance and conclude that such a man would not make a long acquaintance with a village girl. Not to her liking, even if his eyes were as blue as lakes. Too refined, urban. A prince from a fairy tale read to them as a child by a kindergarten teacher. He wouldn't follow his princess to the dining room door in a carriage. Emily was wrong. The next day, the first person she saw outside the dining room was Vincent. He greeted her again with his impossibly warm smile and said, "I have the day off after 3 shifts at Bachtin. Why don't I help you set the tables? Your arm's in bandages. It's early. I don't think it stopped hurting. We can do it better together. Then we'll go to the movies. They're showing an old comedy at the club today. Ivan Vasilievich changes profession. Have you seen that movie before?" Emily's feet had been knocked off the ground. She's not the one being greeted by a real knight in the cafeteria. She's not the one called to the movies after work, or offered to help with trays, forks, and spoons. It couldn't be, because it could never be. But it was happening in real life. Vincent didn't seem at all intent on hiding his obvious interest in her. Emily banished the memories that had come flooding back to her after fiddling with the string of pickle jars. She sat Ellen down at the table in a soft blanket, so that she could finally end the day with some aromatic herbal tea. Summer was soon rolling smoothly into its second half. Time fled, not as it had in her youth, stretching like sweet molasses. Annoyed, Ellen asked to go to bed after tea. It was time for her to go to bed herself. She had grand plans for this summer's warmth and pickles, so long as there were no problems. She'd pack up some presents for New Year's Eve in the fall. It was unlikely that she would be able to get out to the city before then. The last thoughts of the woman had already sunk into a blissful sleep. Tomorrow is a new day and new worries. Emily was a good hostess. What she could not cook from the gifts of the vegetable garden and the garden. It was her and Mama Ellen's house that was old and dilapidated, and everything that grew on the ground and in the ground always succeeded to the glory. Having finished the epic with cucumbers, she switched to caviar from zucchini or juice, which she cooked from all the fruits ripening on the trees. It was her turn to put the tomatoes in jars, then to cut apricots, apples, plums and pears into large slices and send them to sunbathe on metal sheets under the sun. My son has always respected dried fruit compote. He could make it himself at home in the city. It was a simple matter. Emily looked down at the sacks of potatoes, at the makeshift nets made of old stockings and stuffed with golden onions, and sighed. Though she still seemed to have the strength to carry all this wealth into town herself. Would she have to go to Greg again? He'll start his chatter. I've been waiting 30 years for you to marry me. I'll give up the gorilla and the vodka. You know me. She'll smoke all the way to the cabin. I can't breathe. Yeah, pelting her with salty jokes and lewd innuendos. He just won't let it go, the old dog. Long married, 3 grown-up children, grandchildren already. And he keeps looking questioningly into her eyes, as if he wants to read something in them. Don't believe that first high school love never rusts. Since she was young, Greg had been her eternal sighing partner. But he never got anything. One thing's for sure, if she asks him to drive his truck to Archie's, he'll never say no. By the morning of December 25th, a blizzard was brewing. Emily had already arranged with her neighbor Maggie to look after 2 or 3 bags for Archie. Emily had packed such bulky bags that faithful Greg only shouted when he saw them on the doorstep. Be thankful my heart is heavy for you. No fool would have agreed to haul all that stuff into town on our dirt road to the highway. Only my iron horse can do it with 4-wheel drive and off-road capabilities. Would you haul your bags to the bag on a motorcycle? Emily, I wouldn't be so nice to you. Emily hurriedly slipped him a pre-prepared bottle of her famous Naluka made from all the seasonal fruits and berries. The secret of this strong elixir was simple: whatever fruit or berry was ripe. They were poured in a layer on the bottom of a 10-liter container up to half, covered with sugar, then the next layer of ripe fruit, and so on until the last autumn harvest of frost-resistant berries. We let it insist for 21 days, picked, separating from the rest of the fruit and berries, and then topped up with vodka from the village store, for residual disinfection. The result was a drink of unprecedented flavor. The whole village was waiting for Emily and Ellen to treat them to this gift. Greg pushed the bag of money away. He grabbed Emily's hand. There is no such gift. I have been waiting for so many years from you, my grandmother. You are alone. A century. You are not a stone, Emily, nor ice. I can't believe you're still faithful to your first love. It doesn't work like that. Emily shoved Greg away in her heart and gritted her teeth. You can be the only man on this planet. I'll never be yours. You hear me, Greg? You don't know what it's like. All your life one man remember to love, Greg asked. How many times have you and I already brought up this subject? I consider you a friend, not by way of a hitchhiker, a heavy drinker, but not evil. But why are you playing that song again? We shouldn't pick sweet berries together, but bitter berries. I cut everything off without you a long time ago. Even the idea of starting the car. It's going to snow soon. And you still have to get back to the village by daylight. The days are so short, it'll be dark before you know it. Archie was in high spirits this morning. The New Year's Eve party at his firm had been timed to coincide with Catholic Christmas. On this occasion, this Saturday was rented a nice cozy cafe near their office. Since some time ago, a new female employee from the marketing department has been actively making eyes at him. Tonight, he would invite her to his house after the party for a cup of coffee. Archie sighed dreamily and mentally assured himself, chicks like me. I change them like worn-out gloves that don't fit into the last closet. This young lady will not resist. He was sure of his complete male irresistibility. So look, and New Year's vacations he and this person will spend together. Someone has to make Olivier salad for the festive table, and finally to put in order in his bachelor's den. Pretty face and appetizing figure of the new girl will be an additional prize. He'd already broken up with his ex-girlfriend 2 weeks ago. It was time to find her a worthy replacement from those who are not puzzled by complexes. He won't be dragged to the registry office. The redhead from the neighboring department was definitely from this carefree cohort of girls. Winter celebrations promised a lot of pleasant surprises. Coming out of the shower in only a towel, Archie heard a knock at the door. He hurried to open it. Mom, what are you doing here in town? He wondered. I wasn't expecting you. You're in the wrong place today. For some reason, Emily was immediately confused by the cold reception. She wanted to hug her son. She missed him. On the diplomat in her hands, but he squeamishly removed her hands. "You should warn me about your unexpected visits," Archie said. "I might have other plans for the near future. And now you're here. How did you manage to surprise me? What are you dragging across the threshold? Look at your wet footprints on the floor." The events that followed seemed like a bad dream to Emily for a long time afterward. Archie angrily kicked the sack of potatoes, pushed aside the bag of onions, lovingly packed by his mother in a plastic bag so that they wouldn't get wet. With annoyance, he settled down on a large bag with pickles. "How could you think, Mother, that I was starving here? There's a supermarket around the corner. The shelves are full of goods." "I tried to get you some things for the winter holidays," Emily said. "Archie's used to all his own, homemade, natural." "Don't be such a country bumpkin," Archie said angrily. "I've been a city dweller for a long time, and I live by the rules of a big metropolis. I'm not going to waste time on your culinary riches. Pack all this stuff back up, and next time you'll give me a little more notice of your visit. I don't need a mother hen mooching over me like a little chicken. I think you have an old friend in town who's lonely. Go to her with all these presents. Make the old lady happy with a New Year's offering." The young man grabbed the grocery bags and started carrying them out to the entrance, without letting his mother enter the apartment, without at least offering to warm herself with tea. Emily couldn't believe this wasn't happening to her. Her son couldn't do this to her. What evil spells had this town put him under? The truck is probably already out of town and headed for home. She hadn't corresponded with her city friend in over a year. How to know if it was possible to visit her now, or would she also give her the runaround? The snowstorm was getting worse outside. The snow was falling not in large fluffy snowflakes, but in a sharp and chopping way. It was too early to reveal a face uncovered by clothes and headdresses. Archie, meanwhile, carried all his mother's presents out into the empty yard. The yard glistened in this weather, and darkness was slowly descending on Chicago, which liked to come early in the cold season. "I called a cab for you," Archie said. "I hope you remember your high school buddy's address clearly. I've wasted so much time with you. I've got to get cleaned up for the New Year's Eve party. You should know that. I'm going through some changes in my personal life. There's nothing for you to do here in Chicago anytime soon. I'll be fine on my own. I'm going to be 30 years old in April. I don't need your pesky tutelage anymore." A young guy came to the call, fussily began to put food supplies in the trunk, all the time looking back at the angry man, and for some reason the woman, who was writhing in pain, even thought to himself, there's something wrong between them. He is saying something to her. She looks pitifully and covers her face with her palm. But it's none of my business. I'll fulfill the order and go on my way. New Year's Eve and the vacations themselves, if you try for a couple of months. Then, until spring will feed me. Emily got into the car without looking back. It was so unbearably painful, as if something bright, always warming her soul, had been doused with viscous, stinking marsh mud. No bath gels and foams could wash it away. No bath gels and foams could drown out the vile odor of her soul's decay. She always bought in the store all these fragrant accessories for bathing, to pamper, to please Helene. The old woman was always delighted to smell them at home. But here, in this case, the vibes of the subtle odors were unable to remove that blackness. She only relaxed when she climbed into the back seat. The tears came in streams. There was no stopping their rapid flow. Though she didn't like to show weakness in public, she couldn't hold back. The driver asked her sympathetically, "Where are we going, lady?" The answer shocked him. "You can throw me out in a clear field," Emily said. "My son didn't even ask if I had the money to pay you for the job. Prices are different in the city. I don't have enough cash reserves for a long trip. You know," she suddenly became lively, "I can pay you back with village products. I have excellent potatoes, some onions, cylinders with cucumbers, and tomatoes from my own beds. Will that pay?" This cab driver had seen a lot of things in his 2 years in Chicago, but he had never read such hopeless sorrow in anyone's eyes. It's like she just gave up a living son. He was now taking this woman to nowhere. And it felt like she'd just buried him. It didn't take him long to make up his mind, but soon he said, "Why do we need your gifts, Ma? I am. Can't we find a plate of pilaf and a cup of hot tea for a good man?" "What if I'm bad?" Emily asked. "Come on, I'm not kidding. I have a good eye. I can always tell an honest and kind heart from a bad and deceitful one. I'm going to bring you back to my house. Don't be afraid of anything around me. Emily didn't have many highlights in her life, except a few trips with Archie to the sea and those happy times when they were so attached to each other. Once they arrived in sunny Miami, they both immediately fell in love with this southern land with azure sea, sand dunes, the cries of seagulls, daring dolphins swimming directly to the shore. Then, after high school, Archie graduated from a technical university in Chicago, and so there in the dormitory at first and stayed. He didn't make such a brilliant career, but his income was enough for his current expenses. Then I rented a cozy 2-room apartment almost in the center. He spent a lot of time in the company of student friends, and then colleagues. Emily soberly realized that a grown-up young man cannot keep near the mother's skirt. In her hometown in the last 2 or 3 years, he no longer visited. Emily didn't own any modern gadgets. All communication was through an old button cell phone. Archie called her no more than once or twice a month, reducing communication to brief questions and answers. And the connection in her backwoods town was stable, but in bad weather it failed. Their estrangement from each other was probably inevitable. But why did it hurt so much today then? Emily visited her son every year under the New Year's holiday with country guests. His current reaction had put her in a stupor, or had something seriously changed in Archie's soul in this tough town? She hadn't noticed. Only questions were bouncing around in her head right now, and there were no answers. The silent cab driver drove her to the outskirts of Chicago to one of the houses that used to be solidly inhabited by tenants of communal apartments. She was not mistaken, one of those huge apartments with many doors opening into a hallway and an impressive kitchen. She and a young boy had entered. At first she was confused. Within the walls of this apartment lived a whole table, which now spilled out of all the rooms to consider the unexpected guest. There was a speech she did not understand, but there was no aggression in its tone. The fellow cab driver stopped all debate in a flash. A couple minutes later, she was ushered into an empty room with a small sofa, a coffee table, and an old TV on a dresser, rugs with national ornaments on the walls and floor. Women with smiles handed her a set of bed linens, a large blanket, terry towels, and house slippers. Brand new. Emily somehow immediately warmed in that welcoming warmth. After a couple minutes, she caught up. "Please, let's get my supplies from the trunk. Not as payment for your help, not for your wonderful hospitality, just for fun. In them and every potato, cucumber, tomato, a part of my soul. I really want you to feel it." Having consulted among themselves, the residents of the apartment sent a whole delegation to the car, while the cab driver hurriedly snacked on something in the kitchen. An hour later, when her savior, who had been driving all day to feed his family, had long since disappeared in the blizzard, Emily was called into the kitchen. She went in and marveled. There were so many people at the big long table that her eyes were scattered. She thought, what a friendly people. They can't all be members of the same family. At the head of the table sat an elderly woman. Further along the perimeter, younger people. Many children. The men in this tribe from Central Asia were almost all still at work. Their bread in a foreign land was certainly not easy. Emily realized that local traditions and long-established household rituals were familiar from childhood. How difficult it was for these people from distant lands to accept the rules imposed on them and survive in an unfamiliar reality. A leisurely dinner began. The hearty meal was crowned by a large cast iron with a scattering of pilaf, which everyone at the table, as soon as they got a plate in their hands, neatly and skillfully ate directly with their hands. Next to the pilaf was a pile of boiled potatoes sprinkled with coarse salt, which for some reason did not dissolve in the moist steam. Everywhere around the edges were containers of Emily's pickles. One of the young women picked up a green cucumber and took a bite. The other women followed her example, and soon they were clucking approvingly, giving the master a thumbs up in approval. What a strange day it is, Emily thought after dinner. It's only 9 p.m. and already my eyes are traitorously slipping. Not a single person at the table asked her a single question, as if she'd been living with them for 1,000 years. The nearest neighbor then showed her where the bathroom was and escorted her to her temporary abode. Amazing, the woman stated. I don't remember Archie at all. The thread that ties us together, like the umbilical cord between a newborn baby and its mommy, has been severed. The hurt and all the memories associated with him seem to have fallen into the abyss of timelessness. Emily's mind was nothing but a viscous porridge that had had too much water poured into it when boiling, She fell asleep with her head barely touching the pillow. Earlier they had arranged with the cab driver, who had become her good wizard for the evening, that by 6 a.m. he would take her to the bus station for the first bus toward their village. It would be a full 4 hours on the highway to get home. Then, if she was lucky, a hitchhiker. Another half an hour on a dirt road to their village. The district administration promises that the road to their village will be asphalted. But they have been waiting 3 years for the promise. They have been living without a normal road for 30 years. That was the last thing Emily had time to think about before falling into a restful sleep. In the morning, the woman got up so cheerful that she surprised herself. Not a drop of despair after her son's treacherous stab in the back yesterday. Her soul was at peace. Yes, it was all on the doorstep of Archie's apartment. But it was as if the emotion had vanished. No grief, no sadness, no longing. A large cup of coffee and a fresh scone with cheese were waiting for her in the kitchen. One of the older women was carefully placing the same scones in a paper bag for her, gesturing that it was for the road. In her other hand, she held a clear plastic bag containing her jacket, shoved it embarrassedly into Emily's hands, and disappeared behind one of the doors. The cab driver from yesterday came up. "Well, Mother? Did you have some fun with my relatives?" "No. They don't speak Russian very well yet. It was my mother who taught Russian at school in the town of Kant in Uzbekistan. That's why I'm so quick to communicate. She died of a serious illness when she was very young. Since then, I want to help every woman who is old enough to be my mother in some way. I won't hurt the young ones either. Why should I? But I try to be especially attentive to the older ones. I didn't have time to give them everything I didn't give my mother. I missed it. Your son will regret what he did. Yesterday 100 times over. He and I are about the same age, but he hasn't matured into true manly wisdom. They'll come crawling back to you on their knees. You'll remember my words later, but now let's hurry or we'll miss your bus." After the blizzard of yesterday, the city was frozen in snow-white silence. There was hardly a soul on the streets. Only lonely passers-by were hurrying somewhere to go about their business. At such an early hour, it was not even dawn. The sky only turned a pink haze. After gathering her things, nothing else was weighing on her hands. Home to Mama Ellen's house. She missed their home and her mother's caressing hands terribly. Walking lightly to the bus with 2 small bags was almost a pleasure. Emily bought a ticket for the first row of seats and climbed into the bus, which was already under steam and waiting for passengers to see her off. The cab driver waved goodbye once more, and she was suddenly so eager to remember her first and only love that she barely waited until everyone else had taken their seats. No one had bought a ticket next to her. She cozied up in 2 seats at once and plunged into the memories of 30 years ago. The love story of each couple is different. One has fatal passions simmering. The other has a craving for romance off the charts. The third duo builds relationships, as in the tragedies of Shakespeare. If you try to characterize the love of Emily and Vincent in one word, then the most suitable definition is pure mutual love at first sight. He'd noticed her, the girl staring helplessly at the piece of glass sticking out of her hand. She heaved with happiness the moment there was a cracking sound as he tore his cotton shirt into bandages. Their worlds were different. He came from a family of hereditary medical intellectuals. She is the daughter of Matthew and Ellen, born and raised in poverty by the Russian soil and post-war collective farms. Their points of contact were few. But does love ask whose hands to weave together? After the day, Vince and Emily had spent all day setting tables side by side in the cafeteria for the students, and then laughing their asses off watching a comedy at the club. They were hardly different. Here's the revised text. It was as if they were glued to each other with glue. While Emily flew into the dining room with a tray in anticipation of her evening date, Vince carefully stacked the watermelons and melons in the truck, then hurried off, never lingering anywhere. People were running toward him. In their endless conversations, they sometimes got lost and misunderstood each other. Emily would tell how her parents ran to the farm at night. The calf could not come into the world, completely tortured the mother cow, and Vince would ask with a frothing at the mouth whether she had read The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. Vince's family has only had this great novel, printed in a limited edition in 1973, for 3 days. So he and his parents didn't eat or sleep for 3 days in order to have time to read the literary masterpiece. What Pontius Pilate? Who is Wooland? Who are the master and Margarita? Emily thought fearfully. I am so far from all this new stuff. Gently he took the girl by the hand and led her away to a club for dancing, a movie, or just wandering around the neighborhood. Not a hint of intimacy, just endless admiration. A hive that could not be played. Time inexorably flew forward. The days flashed by. Soon the students had to leave for the city. Emily and Vince were oblivious to their surroundings, lost in the marvelous gift of heaven, their first true love. Neither of them had any previous experience with the opposite sex. Vince, contrary to his parents' dreams, was not going to follow the path of a doctor, but was delirious with formulas, integrals and derivatives, the mysteries of theoretical mathematics. That's why he entered a technical university, not a medical school after school. He was not fond of girls, neither at school nor on the student bench. Once at the age of 15, he seemed to fall in love with a girl next to him. But tricksy, quiet, intelligent classmate Attention did not complain. He wrote all the notes in class to the loser. She made eyes at him, waited faithfully for her idol after class on the sports field behind the school building. Vince's feelings waned. He's back to his sine qua non. Emily had more of his love lyrics in her life. Her faithful knight, henchman, admirer Greg had kept her busy since 5th grade. He pulled her thick braid mercilessly, demanded that she write her homework regularly. In the 8th grade, tried to kiss at the New Year's Eve party, but Amy guessed his intentions, prudently washed away from the school ball. As soon as Greg went outside to smoke with the boys, she was gone. Now Vince and Emily were lucky that the girl's boyfriend wasn't in the village. He had gone to the sea with his parents for 2 months. His mother, on occasion a cook, in the pioneer camp from the regional factory, got a job for the hot season. His father, mentor in the circle of skillful hands. There, too, got a job. But they had been on some kind of shift positions before. No one in the village was surprised by their absence this time. Emily's parents noticed that her daughter does not walk, but flies above the ground, but did not interfere in her personal life. The mother only told her daughter, be careful. These good city boys are of a different mold, not like our country boys, who have what's on their minds, what's in their actions. Don't be afraid for me, Mommy. He's the best. He won't even lay a finger on me. We talk more and more. Yeah, we look at the stars at night. Naive thoughts. Who could beat Mother Nature and instincts? The last night before Vince left for home, he'd been so desperate to keep his hand in hers, so affectionate in Amy's eyes, that she couldn't understand what had come over her, what sweet eclipse had pushed her to do it. She rose up on her tiptoes and nestled her soft lips against Vince's, still smelling of the watermelon they'd just eaten together. The guy staggered back, wrapped his arms around the girl's shoulders, nuzzled his nose into the top of her head. Fire me. Don't provoke me. I haven't touched you on purpose all this time, love. I'm afraid if I touch you, I won't be able to stop. And I have to leave tomorrow. Who knows what lies ahead? And without stopping, Amy whispered into his ear. It's my decision. I trust you completely. Vince hadn't expected such boldness. In his 19 years, he hadn't yet known women. But he'd curiously perused the theory in his parents' manuals a long time ago. There was not an ounce of awkwardness, fear of seeming like an inexperienced novice. Of course, he had long dreamed of intimacy with Amy, but he was afraid of offending her, and, in order not to lose his temper, deliberately did not even go to kisses, longer than on the cheek, to say goodbye, too dear to her, too careful of her honor, too respectful. There is such a reverent attitude to the object of his worship. Not all young men devise strategies and tactics to get their girlfriend into bed as quickly as possible. Back home, Vince intended to announce to his parents that he'd met the love of his life. This year he would travel to the village to visit Amy. Then she'd go to college and move closer to him in the city. When the time comes, they'll get married. The girl was too young to break her destiny. Love had decided everything for both of them. They couldn't resist, they couldn't delay. Amy had no regrets. Vince was over the moon. Later at night, after their shy, naive lovemaking, right in the field, amidst the flower buds swarming approvingly on a soft carpet of lush green grasses, they lay hugging each other for a long time, dreaming of the future. They would certainly have a family, certainly 3 children. They would have their own cozy nest somewhere in the city. And in the summer they would come to her parents in the village to be once again in the place where they were connected by this dark blue night, with twinkling distant stars. In the morning, a service bus came to pick up the students. They parted easily, with the firm assurance that the next weekend Vince would come to visit his beloved. Vince never arrived. He was gone. Amy hadn't realized that his parents were at home with suitcases, sharing the news. Son, we're so excited. Dad was appointed director of a huge surgery center in the Far East. It's a modern complex. All the equipment there is state-of-the-art. The best specialists from all over the country are gathered under its roof. It's a great privilege to work there. We've already learned everything. There's also a state university nearby with the same mechanical and mathematical faculty as yours. We're flying out the day after tomorrow. Vince turned pale. What are we going to do? We made a deal with Amy. Daily correspondence by mail for now. I left her my address and hers. I promised to write to her on demand. She'll freak out if I suddenly disappear. After dinner, Vince told his mother that he had met an extraordinary girl in the village, that he was in love with her, and that he missed her. The only thing he'd withheld was the fact that he and Amy were close. Having listened to the attuned offspring, the wise woman immediately solved his problem. Went to a neighbor in the stairwell, with whom she was very friendly, and agreed that all correspondence coming to their address, she will immediately send them to the Far East. When she returned, she told her son about the way out of the situation. I thought to myself, I will later return to this issue. If I realize that our boy is really seriously attracted to that stranger. Otherwise he will have new friends, fellow students, new interests, and new girls. Life itself will put everything in its place. All that happened in Vince's family more than 30 years ago, Amy, of course, did not know. She herself, before she could even see the boy off on the bus, had rushed straight home to try out her pen in epistolary style. Yesterday's schoolgirl was not very good at it. She was afraid to write something stupid, so she decided that she would tell her lover on paper how her every day was going. The first pancake is always a pancake. Amy found it very difficult to write a few lines. By the time she delivered it to the post office a day later in a brightly colored envelope with hearts on it, Vince and his parents were boarding a plane at the airport. 10 hours into the flight, the airliner landed at the airport. Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky was almost a stone's throw away. They would find themselves on the Pacific coast, in Ivaka Bay, which prepared for them a picturesque land. Vince. The parents are a young man himself. Amy, Matthew, and Ellen could not even think that a gray cardinal would interfere in the fate of two hearts in love. Vince's neighbor from the family across the hall. The reason is mundane. But it is this small trifle managed to forever turn the fate of the two families, putting their lives on a completely different track. The fact is that the neighbor had a very young daughter who had long been in love with Vince. She had already tortured her mother with dreams that when she grew up, she would become Vince's fiancée, his wife. Her mother, who herself had raised the now 13-year-old girl without a father, looked at the family of successful doctors with a distant eye toward a future in breeding. It's nothing that they have now gone to Kamchatka for a long ruble. They left the apartment in her care. They didn't even rent it to anyone. She's been trying for years to placate, to please, to inspire trust, to bake a couple of hearty cabbage pies. One for the neighbor, the doctor's ears. That, with their eternal operations, duty when his family night masterpieces to pamper. Boil strawberry jam half of the jars again to the neighbor dear. She has a whole strawberry bushes on the dacha. Well, it is not difficult for her to share with nice people. So, offerings, good-naturedness, questions and participation and tamed the family of surgeons. She had no time to look into their souls. When she took out the first letter from Amy with bright red hearts on the envelope, she didn't send it anywhere. She hid it in a candy box. Let it wait for its time. The rest of the masterpieces in epistolary style from the girl in love also went there. For the first time, she dared to open a message when the hearts on it were black. Who had failed to do so? It had been 3 months since the neighbors had left for distant lands. Vince's mother pelted the neighbor with questions over the phone. Has anything come for your son? The wily woman held her ground. Anything that came in your name. I dutifully sent to you. Immediately nothing else appeared in your mailbox. Presently she held above the steam this last grim, as she called it to herself, envelope. The letter stirred. It contained only a couple of lines. Vince. I can't keep quiet any longer. I'm pregnant. I'm still keeping it from my parents. But if you don't answer my cry for help, I'm going to go tell them my problem. The mother of a teenage daughter in love, pining for Vince, could not help but destroy such a letter in favor of the love of the young man and his mysterious village girlfriend. Knowing the intelligence of this all-medical family, she had no doubt they would not abandon the girl who had gotten their son pregnant to her fate. Not one, even the smallest, remorse did not arise in the soul of the loving mother when she set the ill-fated letter on fire over the flame of the gas stove in the kitchen. It's all right that the paper burned her fingers a little. No wedding, Vince. With another special way bred and grief herself, and the consequences of her promiscuity. Ellen did not regard the fact of the love child's coming into the world as a nuisance or grief. She was still insanely credulous, ecstatically waiting for any word from Vince. She justified his silence in every way she could, invented 1,000 explanations for why her beloved had not yet responded to her letters. When there was no point in hiding her situation from her parents, Ellen told Matthew and Ellen the truth, that she had no regrets, that she loved Vince more than her life, that she had wanted them to be close. There was no scolding, no anger, no bewilderment on the part of her elders. Mama Ellen put her small but strong arms around her. She looked into her eyes and read something in them that she alone knew. Then she said, as she stamped each word, "If your city beau has evaporated forever, it's here without him. Evil tongues in the village do not listen. Big, true love is not given to everyone by fate. People will envy your happiness, and a child from the one you love, isn't that happiness, remember. My dear, if the heavens gave you a child after your close encounter, it means that your deed was approved by the Lord God himself. Look at the world with joyful eyes, give birth, and grandmother and I will always be there for you." The news that Helen would soon become a young mother could not be kept secret in the village for long. Greg, who had returned from the seas, was furious. He even tried to scandalize Ellen. Caught her in the street, so that's what girl did not give a horn. I turn away from the gate. And with the other had time to tumble. The impregnable fortress fell quickly. Or have you always been such a girl? And me just for fun? Ellen tried to walk past the guy throwing angry accusations, but he suddenly rushed to her and frantically began to beg, "You don't listen to me. My jealousy has taken root. If it happens that your sweetheart doesn't come back to you, I'll marry you, and we'll raise your baby together." Yugi was surprised by such a statement from her longtime admirer. Knowing his tough temper, she didn't believe a word he said. Vince alone held her feminine heart. Looking at Greg, the expression shameful became clear. Her heart grew cold at the sight of Greg. It became icy cold. She wanted to run away at once. She didn't tell the boy about the frost inside her. She thanked him dryly for his offer to be together, resolutely replied that it was impossible. That dialogue somehow became the last straw in her agonizing wait for Vince. It's a sad story of life's twists and turns and the mistakes of youth. When Yuji came home, a letter flew into town without any hearts on the envelope. "Hello, Vince. Today I've decided to marry someone else. You are far away, he is always there. I don't see a future with you anymore. Goodbye, our love." I was probably just dreaming. Greg is reliable and faithful to me, which is something I value pricelessly in him. It wasn't Yugi's hand that was stroking the piece of paper. It was resentment, bitterness, and disappointment that whispered in her ear that she should write something derogatory, contemptuous, and cruel to her lover in retaliation. But Yugi still wouldn't sling mud, retaliate, reprimand. There's such an expression, not fate. She thought it was just such a case. The ubiquitous neighbor, who was assigned to send the mail, could not believe her luck. Thoughts fluttered around in her head like birds. The girl's heart couldn't take it. She still turned on the back, gave up Vince. And that's all me and my daughter want. This letter of hers I will send to the Far East with great pleasure. But her devious plans were not destined to come true. It is not for nothing that people talk about boomerangs. It caught up with her after that despicable act. In love with Vince, young lady in graduate school sharply changed priorities, fell into a bad company, fond of medicines. The mother of a classmate worked in a pharmacy. The boy, left there alone, began to understand the pills. And here the fashion went, and without a prescription they could get them. Alas, the mistakes of youth turned into a great tragedy for all participants in this story. What a pity that misunderstanding and intrigue separated two loving people. Their happiness was so close. Young people did not miss this opportunity. Once, betting on weakness, as I and the whole company decided to try a novelty. The guys drank the medicine in handfuls. Couldn't get the neighbor's daughter out of there. After the funeral, no consolation. The mother didn't last long. Why live if the only beloved blood daughter went to heaven prematurely, she thought. God was even more cruel to her, did not give her a quick demise, deprived her of reason. Only her nephew, the seventh water on the vine, remained among her relatives. Is he going to take care of an abnormal aunt, having registered guardianship over her? Quickly dumped a woman aged from grief in a specialized clinic, and rented the apartment to temporary tenants until then. Disassembling things in the house before the arrival of tenants, all the paraphernalia like old cardboard boxes and other unnecessary junk, he took to the trash cans. That's where the candy box with Vince's letters to Emily went too. Now there's no trace of their once great love. The last evidence of the story had faded into oblivion. In early June, as it was due, Emily had a son. The family named the boy Archie. A sturdy, healthy, smiling, actively growing son, and gave cheek. Grandfather Matthew and grandmother Helen on the price of the soul did not tea. Mama Emily idolized the boy, and each of his features found a resemblance to his favorite. Childhood like all the kids in the village fields and meadows with variety, vegetables and fruits in the garden and in the vegetable garden. Favorite river with cool water. The animal world in all yards with cows, bird kingdom, frisky cats. Everyone tried not to even hint about Vince's daddy, realizing that his daughter's heart was still aching, and still washed at night with secret tears of her first love. Vince was welcomed at the University of Texas with open arms. His transcript was full of excellent grades. His knowledge was at a high level. Very soon he was able to dive back into his favorite formulas. At first he waited for letters from Emily with such greed and impatience that his father and mother even feared a little for his mental health. Then there was a period of supposed calm. Vince didn't ask about news from his hometown, and his parents avoided the subject. The letter was a verdict on the village affair, and Vince took it a little strangely. It was as if he'd been expecting something like this, ready for it. He didn't want to share the heartbreak with his parents. The energy was boiling, the frustration inside. He evaluated the events himself, but he didn't voice it. However, youth, new discoveries, new places, new acquaintances took their toll. Gradually, it began to seem to him that he had made it all up. A field with soft grass, the scents of flowers, the greedy lips of his beloved, the sparkle in her eyes. Maybe everyone's first experience leaves such vivid emotions. And in reality, everything was not so romantic. Somewhere in his heart there were echoes of memories, and then they faded into a dreamlike haze, like a fairy tale set against the backdrop of the countryside. Vince had given himself fully to science and had excelled in it. Even before he graduated, a prestigious foreign magazine published a small monograph on the application of certain mathematical formulas to industry. The graduate student mastered the English language perfectly unthinkable for the mid-90s in Russia. The young mathematician was seriously interested in Great Britain and the USA. A year after defending his diploma, Vincent was offered a long internship at an American university. After consulting with his parents, he agreed. On the personal front, the technician-mathematician, who showed great promise, was not at all a reclusive monk. He had affairs with fellow students, did not ignore sparkling parties, easily made unburdensome connections with women. His heart was silent, and sometimes he couldn't even remember their names. Vince traveled to the United States alone, and there he suddenly fell in love. His romance with Maggie, a bright brunette wife from Florida who studied psychology at the same university where he was assigned to lecture, was like a tsunami, a typhoon, a love whirlwind, a tornado. When Vince was offered a contract for another 5 years, he accepted enthusiastically. Maggie finished her studies and finally moved in with him on campus, where he was assigned an office cottage with a large emerald lawn at the entrance and a swimming pool in the backyard. Maggie had only one major disadvantage for health reasons. She couldn't have children. That had bothered Vince at first, but then he'd come to terms with it. He loved the woman with a strange, morbid affection. After the modest wedding, little had changed in their union. Vincent still worked night and day on his mathematics. His wife chose to become a housewife. After his successful university work and marriage, Vince became a resident of this Western country. He had not been to Russia for many years. Modern gadgets now allowed him to communicate with the sight of his relatives on a large computer screen. His restless parents wouldn't part with medicine for an hour, even to visit him and his daughter-in-law. Vince and Maggie traveled extensively on the rare days they were free from work. His royalties were getting larger and larger on the basis of the unusual developments he had made. There was already much being implemented in industrial sectors and even in the space field. The essence of his work was so complex that only specialists understood it, and Vince couldn't stop working on new problems. If he had been asked what his life in America was like, he would have said, without hesitation, that it was happy and serene. It seemed that this prosperous era would be endless. But to whom does fate allocate only white joyful stripes? The black ink of sorrow spilled onto the whiteness. After 17 years of happy married life, Maggie unexpectedly fell in love with a young scientist-physicist who arrived, as her husband once arrived in the United States from Latin America for training. The man was unusually good-looking, a fiery mixture of southern blood, penetrating eyes, inquisitive gaze, luxurious curly hair. There was something of blue-blooded aristocrat and macho in his appearance at the same time. He wore his clothes with such elegance on his athletic figure that one could guess the graceful movements of a strong leopard. The female students in his lectures heard nothing of what he was trying to teach them, but only watched him like a hypnotist and a boa constrictor. Jenna and the newly arrived scientist first crossed paths at a Thanksgiving party. November was chilly that year. The woman, all the while wrapped in a fashionable fur jacket over her evening gown, was saving herself with another shot of whiskey to keep warm. She picked up the glass with the hot drink and reached for the tongs to add ice to the drink. It was at that moment that she encountered the burning eyes of a dark-haired man with striking good looks. They say love is chemistry. The molecules of two bodies and souls collide in the air. Some catalyst intervenes and it's done. That's what happened for Maggie and her new object of attention. They left the party together. The woman didn't care what her husband thought about it. Maggie did not hide the protracted love affair, which became a rope between the two hearts, from Vincent. "I don't care what happens tomorrow, darling. Today I'm madly in love and also madly happy. You don't deserve deception on my part. So I'm saying all of this to your face. Accept it and forgive me. It just happened," she said succinctly. Vince listened to his wife calmly. He had already guessed what was going on and was unsurprised by his reaction. The painful agony of the beginning of their relationship was gone. By and large, he did not care where and with whom his wife spends time. Their love had exhausted itself. Even the warmth was almost gone, just a tribute to the years they had spent together. Nothing more. He suddenly had a sudden urge to leave everything in this distant country, which had never really become his native country, and return to Russia to his parents. But the laws did not allow him to disappear overnight after his divorce from his wife. He was still bound by certain obligations with the university. Some scientific developments continued, and lectures went on as usual. It was necessary to solve issues with real estate and other property, earned over years of hard work as a specialist of his level. The government and the company he worked for paid generously. Vince had amassed a considerable amount of capital that could help him start from scratch back home. It took him 2 seemingly endless years to resolve all the legal issues. Of course, during his stay there, he went to Russia several times to see his parents in person, but he never traveled further than the Far East. Now he wanted to travel to the places of his childhood, youth, and student years. The plans were grandiose. And then there was a meeting with his classmates in his hometown. He really wanted to take an active part in it. Archie's New Year's Eve romance, which had almost been ruined by his mother's sudden arrival with suitcases, had been a stormy and memorable one. Mandy was amazing. She had only one drawback: she was constantly, like a powerful vacuum cleaner, pulling out all of Archie's earnings. After a couple of months, it became clear that not only salaries and advances, but also rainy day reserves were flying into the wind. And Mandy kept saying, "Kitty, you're so cool. Buy me that purse that drove me crazy at the mall." Her mistress didn't want to do any of the housework. They ordered food from restaurants all the time. Cleaning the apartment once a week had to be done by a cleaning company. Inside Archie began to grow a deafening irritation, but it was not so easy to get rid of the mistress who loved broad gestures. By the May holidays, she broke the news to him that she was pregnant. She talked about a stamp in the passport, a fashionable wedding dress from the latest collection, and necessarily diamonds and small ears. so that all her friends collapsed from envy. Marriage wasn't exactly in Archie's plans. He was visibly successful. At this time, his companion was sitting with her friends at the bar and sharing her plans for the near future. Girls. Another sucker has fallen for my bait. I have already told him the fairy tale that we will have a child. Now he's looking for a way out, and I have the next trump card up my sleeve. I'll tell him I'm ready to get rid of the baby. How would he know that after the first abortion I probably won't have children? And I'm a child-free person myself. I don't need cute babies screaming in diapers. Aren't you afraid that one of your men will figure out your pregnancy adventure? One of her friends asked, stirring her cocktail with a bright red plastic straw. What are you talking about? The experienced schemer grinned. Most modern men are so afraid of the legal marriage stamp in their passports that they rush to count the payoffs for their freedom. Archie, meanwhile, was running through his head a combination of how to pull off a deal on behalf of his company and get a big kickback for services from the suppliers. He had no experience with commercial subterfuge. But that was okay, he could handle it. The main thing is that the preparation of this contract was entrusted to him. There was one thing the man hadn't considered. His boss was a clever businessman. He noticed the greedy gleam in his subordinate's eyes when talking about a new equipment purchase. So he instructed the security service to follow Archie in all his movements. A week later on his desk was a full report on the unbridled appetites of Mandy, who also worked in the same firm. Experienced servicemen through her friends also got to know about the scam she had planned. They even knew that Archie had already accepted the terms of separation from his mistress. Even crossed himself mentally, Lord, let him go to all four sides. What marriage? What children? From all this only unnecessary troubles appear. The company decided to catch Archie red-handed at the moment of his meeting with the machine manufacturers. So the two sides hit it off. The reward envelope is already in Archie's hands. It's time for a different scenario. Considering that this was the first attempt of the employee to pocket the fee for the deal in order to purchase not the best quality equipment, the chief fired Archie without severance pay. A rumor was immediately started following the man. Unreliable specialists are not recommended to hire him. All of Emily's aspirations and endeavors went down the social garbage chute. How many lessons she once gave her boy, how many times before entering the technical university she took him to tutors in the city so that he could pass exams with high scores and enter the budget. The unified state exams were then introduced in the region as a trial experiment. Neither teachers nor students knew yet how this system would work. But he and Archie succeeded. How much later, in her student years, she fed, drank, clothed him? Would a young man be able to live on a paltry scholarship with his already then considerable demands? And it was their habit all summer to prepare supplies for the winter, to then solemnly hand the tasty gifts to their son. It had been 6 months now, and Emily still couldn't understand what had made Archie kick her out of the house in a blizzard. But she didn't want to find out what he was up to. She and her mother were still screwing jars of pickles and jam together this summer under long conversations, and they were still so fond of each other. They had no idea that Archie, long since separated from Maggie, was now living on casual labor. He was addicted to cheap hard liquor brought from unknown sources to the convenience store around the corner. His mother was unaware that now he would consider it a blessing to boil those homemade potatoes and snack on vodka with his mother's crunchy cucumber. Sometimes he had the impulse to go to the village and apologize, but his pride was not all drowned in the swamp of degrees. Here he will find a permanent job, he will rub everyone's nose in it, and then he will appear as a queen in his small homeland. The 30th anniversary of his graduation had been a very heartwarming occasion. Vincent didn't expect his classmates to follow his academic progress and be proud of him. The city of his childhood and youth had welcomed him very warmly in general. It hadn't changed much. Everything was native and familiar. After hearing about the tragic events in the family of his former neighbors in the stairwell, Vincent thought, I wish I knew how my life would have turned out if my father had not been assigned to that new surgical center in the Far East. Some annoying worm in his soul began to nudge him, go to that village where you met your first love. No one is obliging you to anything, but don't you yourself want to put an end to that long-ago story? Hiring an automobile, still a novelty in this region, he set off. This western manner had always been to his liking. He vaguely remembered the name of the village where he had once harvested watermelons and melons in the melons fields, but that didn't bother him at all. He remembered the approximate route. He got there quickly on the highway, but when he turned onto a dirt road, he grinned to himself. Some things haven't changed a bit in more than 30 years. He was caught up by a UA's truck running on all sides, and Vincent, who had just stopped for a snack before it got dark, raised his hand to ask the driver to stop. "Good people, good evening," he greeted the middle-aged man. "Can you tell me how far it is to the village? I haven't been in your neighborhood for very many years." The owner of the Uazik looked around the foreigner curiously, at his appearance a gentleman in an expensive jacket and new jeans. "Are you going to visit someone? Or so, driving around the neighborhood for idle curiosity?" he asked. "I'm looking for some people I know, Uncle Matthew and Aunt Ellen's family. They had a daughter," Emily Vincent answered honestly, deciding not to be sarcastic. "They do," the man nodded. "Only the head of the family has been dead for about 7 years. The rest of them are alive and well." Vincent's breath caught in the excitement, and he could barely move his tongue. "Emily and her husband are separated, aren't they?" "Family, kids." "Emily has a son," the man replied. After hearing about the tragic events in the family of his former stairwell neighbors, Vincent thought, "I wonder how my life would have turned out if my father hadn't been assigned to that new surgical center in the Far East." Some annoying worm in his soul began to nudge him. "Go to that village where you met your first love. No one is obliging you to anything. But don't you yourself want to put an end to that long-ago story?" Hiring an automobile. Still a novelty in this region, he set off. This Western manner had always been to his liking. He vaguely remembered the name of the village where he had once harvested watermelons and melons in the melon fields, but that didn't bother him at all. He remembered the approximate route. He got there quickly on the highway, but when he turned onto a dirt road, he grinned to himself. Some things haven't changed a bit in more than 30 years. He was caught up by a UA's truck running on all sides, and Vincent, who had just stopped for a snack before it got dark, raised his hand to ask the driver to stop. "Good people, good evening," he greeted the middle-aged man. "Can you tell me how far it is to the village? I haven't been in your neighborhood for very many years." The owner of the Uazik looked around the foreigner curiously, at his appearance a gentleman in an expensive jacket and new jeans. "Are you going to visit someone? Or so, driving around the neighborhood for idle curiosity?" he asked. "I'm looking for some people I know, Uncle Matthew and Aunt Ellen's family. They had a daughter," Emily Vincent answered honestly, deciding not to be sarcastic. "They do," the man nodded. "Only the head of the family has been dead for about 7 years. The others are alive and well. There's a big brat. I even took her to him to town last winter on New Year's Eve. She's never been married. She gave birth to a boy 30 years ago to a student, but he left her when she was pregnant. She's been alone ever since. I asked to see her, but she refused. But I'm a little more than that with you, Yuji," said the man. Greg looked suspiciously at the colorful man, jumped into his UAZ and drove off across the field. Vince stood in the middle of the road in complete confusion. Then, just as quickly, he climbed into the car, unable to wait any longer. Now he would find his first love, his first woman, and what would be will be. In the village, he found the old cottage of Ellen's family. No hesitation. It's dark. Behind the pattern of this curtain, a bright light burned in the hut. The muffled sound of a television could be heard from the open window. He walked from the gate to the porch on trembling legs, climbed the 3 steps and knocked on the door. Behind it came brisk footsteps and a woman's whisper. "Emily, look who it is. You've come to see us at night." Emily threw a warm shawl around her shoulders. She had just bathed her mother and was dressing her in clean clothes. She had just bathed her mother and was dressing her in clean clothes as she dressed her. She looked at the guest silently from head to toe and said a phrase that made Vince's heart sink. "I knew you'd come back." Every love story may or may not have a sequel. Some endings are like a fairy tale, as happened in this marvelous novel. Listening to the story of Vince and Emily's love story, there's so much irony. You'd think some writer was feeding us fables. It doesn't happen in real life. But it did happen. Emily's wise woman's heart did not set up a judgment on the actions of the man she loved. Sensible masculine heart of Vincent immediately prioritized with mathematical precision, scattered the answers to the tasks at hand. Neither of them knew where the girl's letters had disappeared to. Some evil force had played out for them this sad play of long separation. where they had the lead roles. Archie, who had been working as a loader in a regular store for the second year, decided to go to a beer bar after his shift to relax a little. Lately, he had stopped with stronger drinks, as he began to ruin his liver. Had enough sense to tone it down a bit. The man at the far table seemed vaguely familiar to him. Grabbing a mug with a still foamy cap and a plate of dried shrimp, he headed over to keep him company. Greg, it was him, having settled all his business, stopping at the first bar he could find to grab a bite to eat. He didn't recognize Archie as the unkempt, bearded man who plumped himself on the stool opposite him. "Isn't there any other tables around?" he asked his uninvited neighbor with hostility. "Don't you recognize me, Uncle Greg?" "It's me, Archie. We're from the same village." It was only now that Greg realized that the drunken man looked remotely like Emily's son. Only lower and older, but still he was recognizable. "How's life with you?" "My grandmother's still alive and my mom's still working on her pickles." Archie tried to stretch his face into a wry smile, but his mood suddenly soured. Why did he even sit down with his fellow countrymen? It seemed that he had once been in love with his mother, and now he was going to start teaching him about life again. But Greg grinned good-naturedly and answered, "The whole village is praying for your mother. We have a new road with excellent asphalt. Her husband organized everything and paid the expenses. My grandmother was taken to the Far East to a surgical center and was treated a little. She hasn't become active, but she can move around quite well with a stick. And your parents have built such a nice house next to the old house. It's a sight to behold." Archie thought he'd misheard. Why did Uncle Greg say parents and not one mother? It was as if he'd overheard his thoughts. The countryman went on with his story. Archie's parents had a beautiful love story. 30 years later, they were reunited again. Everyone in the village used to think that such things only happened in books and movies. No, I witnessed for myself that a woman's love is strong, strong and faithful. She waited. This story warmed my soul, gave me hope that even at their age, happiness is still possible. "Come on, brother, I still have to get home. Shall I say hello to your mother? Or would you deign to show up at their house yourself?" "I'll take care of it," Archie grumbled. His mood had fallen, along with his ego. The bus pulled away from the bus stop near the village. The driver looked back at the passenger compartment. There was only some vague-looking man getting out, moving his lips all the way, as if he were practicing a speech. Archie was really working hard to find the words he would say to his mother to apologize. But everything that came into his head seemed empty and insignificant. Love for one's family is in actions, not words. Could he earn forgiveness from his parents? The man crept quietly to the ajar gate and peered through the opening. Workers were laboring in the yard near the old house. A picturesque log house of 2 stories stood out next to the construction site. It immediately reminded Archie of some fairy tale log cabin, where Santa Claus, forest gnomes, or some other magical characters could live. Everything around breathed coziness, some special domestic charm. His mother walked through the yard in an embrace with a gray-haired man. "Yes, it's going to be a great bath. Don't worry," Maggie the man said. "Ellen's mother will be back from her treatment soon. It'll be a nice surprise for her." He kissed the woman on the top of her head and hurried off to the workers to give them new orders. Emily returned to the gazebo, where the electric kettle was already boiling. A jar of Archie's favorite apricot jam and vases of cookies stood on the table. He pushed the wicket gently open and stepped forward, mentally vowing to himself that he would do everything he could to make his family forgive him and welcome him back into their home. If necessary, he would start his journey again from scratch, from the basics. He now knows exactly what things rule this world. Someday he will teach these truths to his children. "Mommy, look what a boat Grandpa made for me," Vivian exclaimed as soon as she saw it. It was early spring outside. The snow had just begun to melt, but all the puddles had already turned into streams, around which the children were running merrily, shouting and laughing. Everyone had paper boats, and some of them had real wooden boats made by their fathers or grandfathers on the weekend. Near a large tree, from which large drops of melting snow were falling, stood a girl of 8, tall for her age. She looked longingly in front of her. She didn't have a boat. Her mom was at work, so she couldn't make one. and the girl had no one else, not even friends. They had recently moved to a new house, and she had not yet had time to get acquainted with anyone, but she liked to go out. But it was hard to have fun when everyone was playing and laughing and no one wanted you. Lily sighed and pouted her lips in resentment. On a bench a little away from the brooks and trees sat a short old man with gray tangled hair and a gray-brown cotton jacket. On his feet were very shabby boots that must have been cold. He looked at the children with a smile, then shifted his gaze to the girl and lowered his head sadly. After a few seconds, some idea occurred to the old man. He jumped up from the bench and ran somewhere towards the house. He knocked on the door. A rather tall woman came out on the porch with a vacuum cleaner in her hands. She asked the old man something menacingly, but when he explained what he wanted, she nodded her head and went into the house. A few seconds later, she returned with a piece of paper. The old man nodded gratefully and returned to his bench. He began to fold the paper into something that looked like a ship. He did it in a very unusual way, in his own way, and even managed to attract the girl's attention. It should be recognized that this old man was one of those who, with his kindness and charm, could make people to himself. He was helped by everyone to whom he turned for help. Either he managed to pity them, or he was able to choose those who were able to sympathize. Nobody knew such people who would not refuse help, but everyone helped, and he never said no when he was asked. Maggie Swan, who lived in a house on the edge of the street, was an old and feeble old woman. She was so weak that sometimes she couldn't carry heavy bags home. Stephen, the old man, was always there to help. Maggie Swan often brought cutlets or soup to his home, an abandoned schoolhouse. Lillian watched the old man with interest as he folded the ship. When he finally finished, he smiled kindly at the girl and beckoned her over to him. Lillian's mom always told her not to go near strangers because they could hurt her, or take her away from her mom. And Lillian had always obeyed her mother's command. But not now. The old man's good-natured smile, curiosity, and desire to play with everyone made her go to the bench. The old man silently handed the girl a small snow-white ship made of thick paper, almost cardboard. It was unusual, not like the others, big, with sails and masts. Lillian did not know that such a thing could be made from an ordinary sheet of paper. Her eyes lit up, and she looked at the old man, as if he were a wizard from a fairy tale she had recently read. The old man nodded at the creek where the children were playing and smiled again. The smile lit up Lillian's face. She ran to play with the others, as if this ship was a ticket to a world of friendship and children's games. Contrary to her wish, the girl did not put the ship on the water and began to feel sorry for it. She ran with the boys, refused to exchange with the boys who offered their crafts. What Lillian got was attention and a desire to play with her. She didn't need anything else. She turned to see that old man again, but he wasn't there. The bench was empty. Lillian looked sadly at the ship and ran home. She would be sure to keep it. No other way, for it was a gift from a real wizard. At home, Lily waited impatiently for her mother. She had to come home from work in the evening, about 5 o'clock. The girl was so impatient to tell about the ship that she forgot to eat and did not even turn on her favorite cartoons, which were only on Saturdays and only at this time. She kept running to the window to see her mother's red coat or her blue beret. But Mom was lingering somewhere. When the hand of the clock passed 5, Lily began to worry. She didn't move away from the window anymore. Tears almost came to her eyes. What if Mommy, like Daddy once, didn't come? The girl was afraid that it would happen again. But fortunately, this time her fears were in vain. Lily's mom, Vivian, came half an hour after the promised time. Lily threw herself on her neck, not even allowing her to put the bags on the floor. "What's wrong?" Vivian exclaimed. "I thought you weren't coming as Daddy," almost sobbed the girl. Sweet Vivian hugged her daughter and squatted down. Lily, like most children, was often dramatic, but it was enough to caress her, and her resentments usually ended after a series of favorite cartoons, or after a batch of ice cream bought especially for her. Now she wiped away her tears with her sleeve and smiled broadly. "Look what I have," shouted the girl and ran off to her room. Vivian smiled and shook her head, trying to get her boots off before her daughter arrived. Lily came running in just a few seconds later and held out a snow-white ship to her mother. Vivian took it in her hands and bowed her head. She examined it closely and came across a faded, barely legible inscription. The woman aghast and drew back, not knowing what to say. "Honey, where did you get it?" The old man on the bench Lily shrugged. "He made it for me." "What did he look like?" Lily wondered. She wasn't good at describing people, so she could only name clothes. Vivian handed her daughter the grocery bags and asked her to sort through them, and went to her room. She sat down tiredly on her bed and sighed. The woman couldn't believe her eyes and still thought she had only imagined it. Vivian reached into her locker and pulled out an old shoebox from there. She carefully removed the lid with trembling fingers and exhaled noisily. Rarely did she have to open this cherished box. For years it had been filled with old trinkets that anyone else would have called junk when they opened a shoebox. But for Vivian, it was the only thing that connected her to her parents. Or rather, so she thought. Vivian Laurel's mom was indeed dead. She had died of cancer when the girl was 13. Her father, on the other hand, had gone missing 3 years earlier. At the age of 13, Vivian was left alone. The boon of her upbringing was taken by an aunt, her father's sister, Helen. She was younger than her brother, unmarried, and belonged to the type of people who believed that nothing could be better than freedom. So she never restricted her niece in anything. However, her upbringing, too. She was not particularly engaged, preferring to write memoirs, go to modeling shoots and celebrate contracts with her many lovers, which she had at least 6 for the time that Vivian lived with her. Except the last one had lingered for 2 years with her son Damien. Ellen had never treated her niece with warmth or anything of the sort. She simply didn't care for the girl. At times she would walk into her room, look at Vivian aloofly, nod her thoughts, and leave. At the age of 18, she subtly began to hint that it was time for her niece to do the honors, and that she was too busy in someone else's house. From then on, Vivian started living on her own. She had been working part-time before, saving money for the future, and now she began to live on her own. 16 years ago, a 13-year-old girl named Vivian sat on a narrow bed with flowered sheets. She was holding a ship made of paper. It had a mast and sails, and was not like the ones the children played with on the street. The girl's face was streaked with tears. She looked sadly at the ship. Her hand trembled. "And what did you get me wrong with this toy?" "Aren't you 5 years old?" Rolling her eyes, she asked Ellen, who leaned against the door and looked at her niece. She was a tall, thin woman with long curly hair and a very pretty face. The woman preferred to wear expensive brand-name clothes and wore good makeup. As a child, Vivian often heard from her mother that she didn't know where she got the money for all this, because Ellen never had a proper job. Once in a while, she sold her graphomaniacal writings to publishing houses and received modest money for photo shoots as a model. "Daddy made this for me," the girl replied, coping with her emotions, and hid the ship in a small shoebox that stood beside her. When the lid was in place, Vivian clutched the box to her chest. "Your father has been gone for 3 years. No? There's no telling where he is," Ellen shrugged. "It's about time you started living your own life. Your mother wasn't very good at it, though." Vivian looked at her aunt with hatred and clenched her teeth. A storm of emotions rose up in her over the mention of her mother in such a negative way. The girl understood that she should not quarrel with her aunt, with whom she would have to live for a long time. But she was not going to listen to such statements about her mother. "It's a memory of him. Only he made ships like this. I know, because no one else had them. He used to leave his signature by folding the sheet in a special way. Would you like me to show you?" Ellen held up her hands, shook her head. Looking at old paper always made me ache. When he had nothing else to do, he also stuck it to others. The look Vivian gave her aunt frightened the woman. She opted to remove herself from the small room, leaving the girl alone with her thoughts. There could be no mistake. It was indeed the same ship. The same illegible letters were folded and stamped on the side as on the old, yellowed pieces of paper. Vivian folded the 2 ships and closed her eyes. "What if I'm just making this up to myself?" The woman shook her head. Nothing had been heard from her father in over 19 years. It was as if he had fallen through the earth. And now, after all this time, Vivian sees the same ship. What if it was just a coincidence? But she didn't believe in coincidence. Vivian believed in fate. Maybe it was her desire to have at least one loving relative. Except for her daughter, of course. but she was too young to confide her worries to her. Vivian had never been an optimist. Quite the opposite. Life didn't give her moments to believe in miracles or happy endings. First her father disappeared, then her mother died. A self-obsessed aunt became her guardian. At 19, it seemed that life was finally starting to get better. When the young girl was in law school, she got a boyfriend and they started living together. It seemed then that it would always be good. But fate never left Vivian. They just gave her a little respite. And then years later, there was grief in her life again. The usual ordinary grief. The woman was glad to have her daughter, but she was very afraid for her. In essence, Lily was all Vivian had left. And the tiny chance that her father was still alive lit a faint flame in the long-lost woman's soul. "Lily," Vivian shouted, putting the box away. She had never shown it to anyone since that day at Ellen's house. It seemed to be something private and intimate, something to be hidden and given to no one. "Honey, come here." Lily ran into the room. Her face was smeared with flour. It certainly didn't escape her mother's attentive gaze. Vivian looked at her daughter with that maternal look that made it impossible to lie. Lowering her eyes, Lillian confessed. "I dropped the flour. The whole packet. I meant to make cheesecakes this morning, but I remembered too late. I thought I'd have it cleaned up before you got here." "Kids," Vivian thought and shook her head. For a second, the heavy thoughts were gone from her head and she looked at her daughter with a smile. Lily was the only ray of light in her life, and she wasn't ready to lose it. "Okay, we'll deal with the flour," Vivian said. "You'd better tell me, where was the old man who made you the boat?" Lillian sighed and tried to explain the place. Vivian had grown up in this town, so she knew the streets and nooks and crannies very well. However, even she had a hard time figuring out the location from her daughter's clumsy and slightly awkward description. "The garages are near the village?" Vivian shrieked when she finally understood. Lillian shrugged her shoulders. "If it's not them, I've completely forgotten the town." Lily didn't understand half of her mother's words, so she just nodded and pulled her by the hand into the kitchen. "Come on, I'm hungry." "Oh, you'll be hungry all day. I want rice with a cutlet." The girl nodded and rushed into the kitchen. "But first, let's remove the flour." Vivian grinned. A heavy sigh sounded on a cool spring street near a small village. It wasn't really a village, but a part of the city where private houses were still standing. When the center and most of the districts were given for the construction of high-rise buildings, the inhabitants of this part of the city refused, and there remained a settlement of private houses. It was quite small, but because of the heavy car traffic and the large number of plantations, it was sought after by teenagers in the evenings and children during the day. Vivian had no idea how her 18-year-old daughter had found this settlement, if it was far enough away from their apartment. Instead, the woman was greeted by the familiar fresh air and a view that hadn't changed at all. It was worth saying, the settlement hadn't changed in the 10 years she'd been out of town. Unlike the town, where new stores, buildings, schools, and kindergartens had sprung up, here stood the old grocery store, where a tall, full-figured Nellie, who never wore a blue apron, probably still worked. Vivian and her friends often ran behind the garages or sat in the village's cowering playground. Besides, there were lots of abandoned houses here, a teenager's paradise. There were streams and puddles everywhere. But Vivian remembered the way to the garages. She knew she wasn't likely to find anything there, but it was worth a try. Then she intended to ask around. In a place like this, everybody knows everybody. Really, Vivian grinned. The garages hadn't changed at all, except that they were a little dimmer than they had been 10 years ago. They still stood close together. In the middle was a beaten path where teenagers ran around, and one garage had an old 9-wheeler on it. No one knew how it had gotten there, but it had been there since before Vivian had moved in with her aunt. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see the bench where the old man had been sitting, according to Lillian's story. And a little farther away stood an old, centuries-old oak tree, its branches spreading out for many meters. There stood the girl. Vivian looked around more carefully, hoping to find some hint of the old man who had made the boat. "Girl, you shouldn't stand where the cars go," a loud, very sonorous male voice sounded behind her. Vivian turned indignantly toward the man and opened her mouth to say what she thought, but she failed. "Damien, are you okay?" she said. In front of the woman stood her longtime and not the most pleasant acquaintance. He was the type of memory that you didn't really want to remember. Tall, blonde-haired, and very much like her. Oh gods, how badly did Vivian want him gone, disappear, like her father had once been, without a trace. That was her ultimate dream at 16, the woman thought. To meet him now was a complete surprise to her. "I live here." "How you ended up here is the question," the man grinned. Damien was a year older than Vivian, but he was in the same grade as her. Due to a lot of moving around by his father, who was in the military, he changed schools often. A year after Laurel, Vivian's mom, died, Ellen got together with Damien's dad and the boy moved in with them. Or rather, he moved in with Vivian, for he shared a room with her for the next 2.5 years. It was a terrible 2.5 years. Vivian preferred never to remember them. 13 years ago, a tall, blonde-haired boy had flown into the room and thrown his backpack right onto the floor. The backpack was light. There were hardly any textbooks in it, but it hit the leg of a girl who was sitting at her desk trying to do her homework. It's worth saying, Vivian had always studied hard, trying to get good grades. But lately, because of the presence of an uninvited neighbor, she had fallen behind in her studies. So she had to do her homework when no one was in the apartment. Luckily, Damien liked to hang out after school with his buddies. "How many times do I have to tell you not to throw things in the room?" the girl asked angrily, not turning around. She had already started looking for her old headphones to isolate herself from Damien's chatter. Yes, it was his favorite thing to talk. While Vivian did her homework, he pestered her constantly. "This is my room too, Prickles. And you should stop worrying about order like this apartment is yours," Damien said. Vivian couldn't take it anymore and turned to face the guy. "You know, it doesn't matter where you are. Throwing things on the floor, talking loudly all night is unacceptable anywhere," she replied. Damien grinned and tossed the tattered tennis ball from one hand to the other. "You're too right, baby girl. We're only 9 months apart," the girl muttered resentfully and went back to her algebra homework. The headphones were finally plugged in, and Vivian could no longer hear Damien's annoying, mosquito-like voice. Not long after that day, Vivian lost her headphones. More correctly, Damien had ruined them, fed up with her ignoring his words. Then Vivian even cried. And now, many years later, she stood in the garages and looked at that same annoying and nasty face. Of course, they were no longer children, and Vivian herself had long since become a mother. But childish resentments don't just go away. That was why she felt a nasty suffocation in her soul, as if there had been an encounter she did not want. However, despite her feelings, Vivian smiled. "I recently moved here," she said. Damien shifted his gloves into another pocket and grinned. "I thought you had an apartment in Springfield, didn't you?" "I sold it," Vivian answered briefly. "And no, I don't want to talk about what happened." The man grinned. The familiar dimples appeared on his face. He was standing quite far away, but even from that distance Vivian could see the familiar light in his eyes. "Do you want to come in? I don't live far from here," Damien asked. "Or do you have something to do?" "Next time I will. Right now I've got 44 minutes before my shift starts. And I still have to find the homeless guy the 8-year-old kid described." Damien's eyes widened. He looked at the woman in surprise and grinned again. He didn't seem to understand anything, but he was insanely curious about the homeless man. Vivian didn't know if she should answer Damien, since she never liked him and only did nasty things to him. But sensibly, she briefly described the situation. She realized that it would be very difficult to find the old man without local help. Besides, Damien, like her, was a grown man. It would be foolish to ruin a chance to find a possible father because of a childhood grudge. "So you're looking for the man who made your daughter's boat?" Damien clarified. "I won't ask why you're looking, but I can't help you yet. I just bought a garage here. I don't know anything or anyone yet. But I'll be sure to ask around. Maybe someone can tell me something." Vivian nodded gratefully. She hadn't expected to be so lucky. It was the first time fate had taken pity on her. given that it was Damien, though. "Give me the number," he said. Vivian looked at him blankly. "I'll call you if I find anything." "Or do you want me to pigeonhole the answer?" Damien snickered. No, Vivian mumbled. There he was, the real Damien, sarcastic and sarcastic. "Too bad," the man smiled wryly. "I would have had to get your address." Vivian held back the urge to reply and handed Damien a business card. He took it and whistled. "Juvenile Inspector, Senior Lieutenant Adams, Vivian. Not bad. I never thought you'd be on the police force." "In Springfield, I was a specialist in another field, and here they just hired me to raise kids. I never thought I'd be doing that," Vivian replied. "I didn't see myself as a schoolteacher either," the man chuckled and punched the number into his phone. Vivian's eyes went wide. "What? No way. You were dumb as a cork. How could I be?" Damien rolled his eyes and shook his head. 13 years later, and you're still so self-righteous and self-important." "Who's to say?" Vivian snorted. "All right, well, if you hear anything, give me a call." She hurriedly left without saying goodbye. The thoughts and feelings of childhood returned. Someone will probably say it's strange that they're almost 30 years old. What childish resentments. But for Vivian, immersed in her own problems after the death of her mother and the disappearance of her father, it was the last straw. A drinking aunt, a strange man in the apartment, and a man who took her room and made her worry almost every day. She almost lost her gold medal because of him, and had a fight with her aunt so bad that she threatened to get rid of her niece. It wasn't just a childish grudge, it was something that couldn't be forgotten. "Baby, stay with Aunt Stacy. She'll look after you," Vivian whispered quietly in her daughter's ear. "But where are you going so late?" Vivian sighed. She couldn't tell her daughter the truth. "I was called for work," she replied. Lilia nodded and hugged her mother. "Aunt Stacy, I'll pick her up in the morning then, so I don't wake you up, okay?" Vivian said to her tall, thin neighbor. Stacy nodded. It wasn't the first time she'd stayed with a girl whose mother worked all the time. There were a lot of downsides to raising a child alone. Vivian left Stacy's apartment and went about her business. She got into the old car that had once belonged to her husband and drove off. At 12:30 at night, the bell rang. On the other side was Damien's slightly agitated voice, asking to come urgently to the abandoned school building. Vivian was angry. She just didn't understand what he wanted from her at almost midnight. But he was asking to come urgently. So she sent her daughter to a neighbor's house and set off towards the school building herself, remembering where it was. Night roads were a nightmare for the woman. She hated driving anywhere in the dark. The fear left over from the accident constantly rattled her, but the odd joking text messages Damien sent kept Vivian driving on. She just wanted to remember a couple of self-defense techniques and smash his smug nose in his face for upsetting her daughter and making Vivian herself drive at midnight to an unknown destination. Oh, how angry she was. But there was nothing she could do. She just gripped the steering wheel and read the dumb jokes and Damien's messages out of the corner of her eye. Vivian wouldn't be surprised if she arrived at the building and he was waiting for her with a smile and said he was just bored. The car had to be parked far away from her destination simply because the woman didn't know what kind of soil was there. Considering it was spring, there could be snow as well as knee-deep water. And that was a best-case scenario. Vivian climbed out of the car and turned on her flashlight. A good thing she had guessed to grab one, trying to remember the way to the abandoned school. Vivian tried to walk through the mud and snow. Good thing her shoes didn't get wet. Despite excelling in her studies, she always liked to have fun with her friends. She never lagged behind her girlfriends in relationships, also ran behind garages and came home after midnight tipsy. Really, it was once or twice, no more. Auntie was to blame. While the other girls sprayed themselves with tons of perfume and lit a whole pack to cover up the smell of cigarettes and alcohol, Vivian didn't have to do that. Aunt Eleanor didn't care about her. She was immersed in herself and her memoirs. Vivian wanted to listen to moralizing like the others, wanted to cover up odors and try to get out of the house after midnight, but she couldn't. Eleanor herself sometimes asked her why she didn't drink. invited her to her bohemian parties and suggested her acquaintances as suitors. Because of this, Vivian often left the house or sat with her headphones on. At that time, she and her friends climbed all the abandoned houses in the neighborhood. Of course, the huge school building didn't go unnoticed. Memory did not fail Vivian. She identified exactly where the school was located. It was a huge, crumbling building that had once been the site of a factory, then a garment shop, and then abandoned. 10 years ago, the building had been considered a wreck, but now it seemed to be held together by nothing but good word of mouth. Vivian sighed and walked inside. She couldn't figure out what Damien wanted in this place or why he needed her. As she entered, she heard the annoying creaking of the wooden floor, which was like a sieve of mouse droppings. There was trash, cigarette butts and bottles lying everywhere. Vivian pulled out her cell phone and asked Damien where he was. In response, he shined the phone from somewhere above. "Where are you? Why did you drag me out of bed?" Vivian shouted. "Over here, Evans." Damien's voice sounded. "Damien." Vivian broke into a run, but the man's warning shout stopped her. Damien was hanging from a hole in the floor on the second floor. Apparently he had fallen through it. He somehow kept his balance and even managed to hold the phone. "The floor is very unreliable. You get there, you might fall through it yourself," Damien explained, shining the light on the floor. Vivian nodded. She was well aware of that too. "Why didn't you call 911? Figured since you got me in here, you'd have to get me out," Damien sighed indignantly. "The guys told me about the local homeless guy who lives at the school. They say he walks around, helps everyone, and they feed him for it. Yeah, they give him clothes. Are you sure it's him?" Vivian asked excitedly, and then she stopped. "Okay, I get it. We'll talk about it later. For now, we need to figure out how to get you out. Shouldn't we call the emergency services?" Damien didn't have time to answer. The plank beneath him began to make an ear-splitting creak and squeak. Sure, the height wasn't too great. He would probably survive the fall. But it wasn't just the height. The first floor was full of beams, metal objects and such. If he fell on them, no ambulance would help. Vivian gasped and rushed up the stairs. For a second, she was seized by memories she'd rather not remember. Of that very day, she hadn't heard Damien yell. She only heard the damn boards that creaked like a crunch in her body and generally made too many sounds that just kept the woman from concentrating. She realized that the emergency services wouldn't make it in time. Remembering her lessons on rescuing drowning people, Vivian spun on the floor as soon as she heard the creaking beneath her. She prayed to God that she wouldn't fall. An image of a daughter who might be alone came to mind, but then another, darker and gloomier one. Vivian crawled harder. Carefully, she pulled off her belt. Vivian tossed one end to Damien. He tossed his phone back to the ladder and picked up the end of the belt. Vivian grabbed some kind of beam with her other hand and started pulling. "I'm not going to follow you," Damien warned. "No, I'm not." Vivian parried and pulled again. Damien started to crawl out of the hole, but it was painfully slow, and the floor beneath them creaked harder and harder. The man seemed to be stuck, thanks to the thick jacket that kept him from falling. However, it didn't let him get out either. Vivian managed to pull Damien out of his trap, and she was sweating. Her arm ached. When the floor was beneath the man, he crawled slowly toward the flimsy staircase. Vivian went down to the first floor first and sighed in relief as she unbuttoned her jacket. "You're crazy," Damien said, leaning against the wall. "I remember when we caught a guy last year, and I had to do a lot more pirouettes than that." The woman grinned. A second after she said that, a beam fell a few centimeters from where Damien was. It fell through to the first floor and split in two with a clatter. Both Vivian and Damien stood wide-eyed. "About time," Damien said and exhaled. "It could have been me." The angry look the woman threw at the boy was unmatched. For a second, it seemed like Damien would have chosen to go back. "Why the hell did you call me instead of the emergency services? Have you had enough of life, you idiot? Are you out of your mind?" Vivian shouted, approaching the man. "You're an idiot and a moron." "Are you scared for me?" Damien asked, perplexed. Vivian stopped speaking and leaned against the icy stone wall, crying. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held back as she always did. "I'm losing everyone," she said hoarsely. "And lately it seems to be my curse. I've lost my mother, my father, my husband. I didn't bury my mother in front of my children as a grown woman when I was 13. I didn't understand what had happened or how this was possible. My father was out of my life even earlier, starting a series of these events. I was 10. I didn't even have time to memorize what he looked like. If it wasn't for the pictures, I wouldn't have known." Vivian continued in a shaky voice. "I buried my husband, not as a gray-haired old woman with trembling hands, but with a child in my arms, a 7-year-old girl who to this day doesn't understand why Daddy left her. And Daddy, at the last second of his life, called me. Not the emergency services, not the ambulance, but me." One traitorous tear rolled out of Vivian's eye, but she brushed it away so quickly Damien didn't notice. He'd been in an accident. The car flipped over, warped. It was impossible to get out from the inside. He realized that, so he called me and apologized. I was at work interviewing a witness. I was angry that he interrupted me. Then I got a voicemail from him. I wanted to open it, but I got a call from the ambulance. He was driving in the dark late at night, and he sent a video of him saying goodbye to his daughter. Vivian covered her face with her hands and breathed heavily. She couldn't understand why she was saying all this. Much less Damien, truth be told, he didn't care who to tell anymore. In the 8 months that Greg had been gone, Vivian had never, ever told anyone about her pain. "That's why I was afraid for you. Because I won't suffer another death. Especially one that's my fault," she said in a muffled voice. Damien put his hand on Vivian's shoulder. "I'm sorry, I really am. It was stupid of me to come here alone and call you." Vivian raised her eyes to the man and shook her head. "I'm just glad you're alive. I'm glad it's all over. Wait." Vivian's discerning eye spotted movement in the darkness, as if someone was standing there eavesdropping. The woman snatched the flashlight from Damien's hands and shone it into the darkness. A short man with a beard and mustache, wearing an old hat, a tattered cotton jacket, and old boots, was looking at her. Vivian recognized him. It was exactly as Lillian had described him. "Papa," she whispered. Vivian remembered little about her father. Vivian was short in stature, shorter than Laurel, and certainly shorter than Ellen. Her father had a tattoo on his forearm and a large scar behind his ear. Vivian didn't know where it came from, but she remembered her father telling more and more stories about its origins. At first, she believed it. Eventually, she realized she was being lied to. Now, an old man with gray hair and a sad, frightened look stood before Vivian, and she had absolutely no way of knowing if it was her father or not. She took a step forward, but Damien grabbed her arm. "Father, what are you talking about?" Vivian waved the man away and made her way toward the old man. With slow, cautious steps, she was afraid to startle him. "Good evening. My name is Vivian. Your name?" The old man smiled, revealing yellow teeth. "My name's Stephen. Your father's name was Eugene, wasn't it?" Damien asked with his usual sneer. Vivian rolled her eyes and chose not to answer. "You don't recognize me. I realize it's been 19 years, but..." 19? The old man interjected. "That's the only years I remember. I didn't count, of course, but about 20 years ago I woke up in another city in the snow, remembering nothing." Stephen lowered his head and began to speak hoarsely, as if remembering something he very much disliked. Vivian listened attentively, trying to look at the unfamiliar features of his face. "I lived there for a few years, and then I came to this lovely little town by chance. The people here were very kind. Not like the people where I woke up. They feed me, they give me water, they even give me clothes. And it's not a bad place to live. It's chilly in winter, of course, but I'm used to it." Shocked by the face and complete incomprehension, Vivian looked at the old man in front of her. She listened to him, and she felt scared, as if what he told her had happened to her personally. It was so horrible that she took a few slow steps back and leaned against the wall again. Damien touched her shoulder again and nodded, letting her know he was close by. "So you don't remember anything that happened before you woke up in that city?" Damien asked, giving Vivian time to pause. The old man shook his head. "Do you have a tattoo of a ship on your forearm?" Vivian asked. Stephen smiled as he looked at the girl and rolled up the sleeve of his wide jacket. "There are dots right there. Ships. I've always liked them. They're beautiful, you have to admit. Born to travel. We don't have the sea to get a glimpse of this splendor." The air stuck in Vivian's lungs and wouldn't come out. She looked helplessly at Damien and nodded. The man looked at the old man strangely. There was distrust and suspicion in his gaze. "And the crescent-shaped scar behind his ear?" Stephen shrugged his shoulders. "I haven't had to look in a mirror in 20 years. "I am," the old man said, nodding. Damien walked over to him and asked him to remove the hat behind his ear. There was indeed a large, thick scar that looked like a crescent moon. The man turned to Vivian and nodded. She couldn't hold back a sigh. Her knees trembled so hard it felt like the ground was about to go out from under her feet, and her hands couldn't grasp the phone in her pocket. Someone had texted. Right now, though, it didn't matter at all. Holding herself back, Vivian pulled out her phone, and from under the case pulled out an old, tattered photo of her father and mother. They were smiling happily together and looking at the camera. "Careful, Vivian." She held the photo out to Damien. He showed it to the old man with a flashlight. "Do you recognize it?" Stephen shrugged his shoulders as usual. "The man, not so much. But the woman looks familiar, and she's beautiful. I think I've even dreamt about her sometimes. Yes, that's definitely her. I couldn't figure out where I'd seen her. She comes to me in my dreams, often talking nonsense." "Well, that's not surprising. The cold makes you dream." "That's my parents, Laurel and Yugi Swan. 19 years ago, my father went missing. He was short, with a tattoo of a ship on his forearm and a scar behind his ear. He made paper ships and gave them to children." "How did you give a ship to my daughter?" Vera asked. The old man listened to her in silence. "Don't you dare say a word against it." There was a storm of emotions on his wrinkled face, from fear to hope. It seemed as if he were about to cry. "And what makes you think I am your father, madam?" he said at last. "Yes," Vera answered distinctly. "Why didn't you say you were looking for your father?" Damien whispered almost in Faith's face. They talked Stephen or Eugene into having Damien come over to their house for the night and go to the hospital the next day. Admittedly, it wasn't an option Damien liked very much, his apartment having been turned into a sleepover. "I wasn't sure." Vera shrugged and walked over to the sink to pour water. "I couldn't tell you that maybe my father was a bum who gave the kids paper boats. I thought I was crazy. Besides, it's not your place to tell me that." "Is it okay to bring him to my house?" "First of all, you suggested it. Second of all, it's not okay to bring him to my house. I'd have Lily come over in the morning and find a homeless guy smelling like garbage on the couch." Damien nodded. "Okay, Vivian, I get it. I have a former neurologist who works at Central Hospital. I'll call her in the morning and see what I can do." "Yeah, well, call me and I'll try to get there early." There was a loud sigh. Damien rolled his eyes expressively. "Where are you going?" "At 2 in the morning. Stay. I've got a great bed. I also have a folding chair bed. Girl, you have clothes to sleep in, don't you?" Vivian nodded. She was very tired and didn't even try to refuse Damien's offer. In the few hours they had spent together, the hatred and bad memories had faded away. Maybe it was the fatigue that had caused it. Or maybe Vivian finally realized that they weren't children anymore. Despite their tiredness and even disconnectedness, neither Vivian nor Damien wanted to sleep. The man stripped the bed and spread out the couch. At first, Damien tried to walk quietly around his apartment, but then he realized that it was very difficult to wake Stephen. It wasn't surprising, though. Stephen slept in an abandoned building next door to alcoholics. They hardly behaved quietly at night. Vivian made tea for 2. A man came in and plumped tiredly in a chair. "So why a former doctor?" Vivian smiled and sipped her green tea. It should be clarified that Vivian liked to steer the topic away from herself. She hated being the center of attention. The reason for this was that she was afraid, being always in her aunt's house, to be an appendix to the apartment rather than a member of it. Vivian carried this behavior into later life as well. She hardly had any friends. Those couple of colleagues from work and former classmates remained in Kasimov, where the woman had lived for the last 10 years. She did not make acquaintances in the new city, and admittedly she didn't want to. For example, Vivian met Stacy by accident, having mixed up the doors of the apartment in the building where Lily and Vivian live. Not all the apartments have a number on them, because the house is newly built, and not even all the apartments have been sold yet. Those who have already settled in have put numbers on their doors. Vivian and Stacy, who had just moved in, didn't have time to do that. Late one night, after hanging out with a rude teenager who had been drinking, Vivian came home and got the wrong apartment door. She banged on Stacy's door for 20 minutes before she called the police. It took the police officer a long time to figure out what had happened. Damien grinned and shook his head. Vivian noticed that he was doing that a little too often lately. "Do you care about that?" Vivian shrugged and took another sip of her tea. It was hot and warmed her body. It was only now that she realized how tired and cold she was. "I was afraid," she said reluctantly. "We didn't see eye to eye." Vivian laughed. "It's not for me to know that it's almost impossible to get along with you." Damien smiled. "But that phrase is almost always an excuse. So what happened? Did I cheat?" "No, of course not," the man brushed it off. "She just wanted children. All her life she'd dreamed of a big wedding and a family. And I was 22. I'd just gotten back from the army, and admittedly, I wasn't planning to have kids for the next couple of years. Of course, we tried to live together, to stop quarreling, but in the end, she left." Dina smiled sadly. "I drank tea without sugar. Do you remember? It's nice." "It's hard to forget. I used to run to the kitchen and make you tea 5 times a day because you were lazy. Maybe I liked it when you looked after me." "No, you just like picking on me," Vivian grinned, glancing at the wall. While Damien was gone, she had time to look around the apartment a bit and was basically surprised. Despite the outside clutter, it was clean. The one-bedroom apartment resembled the one Vivian had lived in with Ellen. A large room, a living room, and a small bedroom. The kitchen, surprisingly, was done in very nice modern colors with a tall table and a few paired chairs. It wasn't hard to realize that the man lived here alone, though. There was one skillet on the stove and one plate and fork in the sink. There was one cup on the countertop. Vivian had to work hard to find the other cup. "So what's your ex-girlfriend's name?" "I get it. You just don't want to talk about it, right?" "Okay, I played along. Her name was Abby, and she's a great name. The girl's a great neurologist and probably a good wife. She's also a mom, had a son a few years ago, and surprisingly, I became his godfather." "No way. I've always found it hard to maintain good relationships with exes. How would I know, though? My husband was my only partner, and he died. So tragic and pathetic. He died and I stayed." Vivian pitched forward and opened her eyes in surprise. "No way. She's 90 years old." 82 was celebrated at the beginning of the year, Damien replied. "She still tells stories about being in England in 1950. Vivian couldn't stop laughing. It felt like someone had jammed the on button. "I can't understand how you got into school," she said with a laugh. "I could never associate you with a teacher, except as a criminal." "Did you ever associate me with anyone?" Damien asked, smiling with the corners of his lips. The silence was more eloquent than any phrase. Vivian had never really seen Damien as a good person, never thought he'd become anything more than a bully. "There was a time when there was no work at all. My father was drinking himself to death, going crazy," Damien said, shifting the mug of tea from hand to hand. "There was nothing to live on. My neighbor worked at the school as a vice principal. She'd retroactively enrolled me in some kind of teacher training course and got me a job as an OBL teacher in September. Hotabike had just retired." "Hotabike? What did they call the old OBL teacher who wore a long beard and was bald?" Vivian asked. "Surprisingly, I liked it," Damien continued. The pay wasn't great, but it was livable. I graduated as a history teacher, and now I have 2 jobs in classroom management. Vivian and Damien talked a little more about different things: work, family, and the past. They talked about the past only in passing, trying not to talk about how they felt about each other. For the first time in years, Vivian closed the gestalt of her resentment over what she thought was a spoiled childhood. "Thank you," the woman said as she and Damien went to bed. The man looked at her perplexed. "For keeping the conversation going and not letting me shut down," Vivian explained. Vivian leaned forward and opened her eyes in surprise. "For keeping me from thinking about what's going on with me and my father." "You're welcome," Damien replied simply and succinctly. "I've always done this. I'm not used to it." "What are you talking about?" Vivian asked, confused. "When we lived at Aunt Lily's house, it happened a lot. She'd say something to you, and you'd dwell on the words, the thoughts. I could see how you couldn't handle the flow of thoughts and delusions in your head. That's why you were talking nonsense. You were just trying to distract me from thinking." Damien shrugged. "Sometimes I just like to piss you off," he said, and retreated to the bedroom, where he went to sleep in a small and hardly comfortable chair, leaving Vivian alone with her thoughts. She couldn't believe it. She really had a fixation on what she was being told. Vivian spent long periods of time thinking about problems and their solutions, and knew about the problem, but she could never think that Damien noticed it. However, they had lived in the same room for several years. It would have been strange not to notice it. "We've got a lot of tests to do, of course, MRIs, blood work, and so on." Abby turned nervously to the door of room 8, where Stephen was lying. "Besides, it's important to get him out of the state he's in right now, since he doesn't have any identification. My hands are tied. If the story Damien told me is true, you should start recovering the documents immediately so we can start treatment." Abby was a petite blonde woman wearing square glasses with a round face and dimples on her cheeks. She smiled at everyone and was polite. She was also very excited about Damien's arrival. She seemed to really care about him. Only Vivian couldn't tell in what way she cared for him. "Thank you, Abby," Vivian said. "But if he hasn't had memories for 20 years, can they come back?" Abby put her head down into the clipboard. 20 years is a long time," she replied. "Patients usually recover quickly with supervision," Amy said. "But your father has signs of frostbite, signs of beating. He's also probably been drinking and smoking. Plus he was eating leftovers. That obviously didn't make things any better. Also, for memories to come back, you need familiar surroundings, familiar people. And he was living in an abandoned school, and hardly anyone was trying to help him. I can't say for sure, but the chances are slim to none. We'll do what we can, but I can't make any promises. Especially not until he has his papers." Vivian covered her face with her hand and shook her head. She didn't know what to do or how to be. The situation was getting worse and worse by the second. "Thank you, Abby." Damien smiled and walked away with Abby somewhere. When he returned, Vivian looked sadly at the room where her father lay. The orderlies had cleaned and dressed him. Vivian had brought new clothes. Now the woman was sure this old man was her father, short, with blue eyes, a scar and a tattoo. She had found him. Except he didn't remember anything. And that was terrible. Damien called out. "I've been thinking about the documents. We can't recover them yet." "With a stone in my heart," Vivian said. Her words were soaked with grief and heaviness. Dad had a business, apartments, money, and he'd disappeared too suddenly. And he was in a foreign city. Mom said he was away on a business trip. When he disappeared, he flew out. But he couldn't come back. And I think it's for a reason. He's clearly been helped to forget his life. If we recover the documents and his status, those involved might be very unhappy." Damien nodded and leaned against the cold wall, adjusting the white robe slung over his shoulders. 20 years have passed. Do you really think anyone still cares? I've been on the force for 7 years and, I've seen so much brutality. People are sometimes willing to remember things from decades ago, Vivian said. And if it's about money, they never forget. Yeah, I get it, Damien nodded. When you and I need to find out who's responsible for what happened as soon as possible. Otherwise, we won't be able to cure your father. Thank you for helping me and not going against my better judgment. You're welcome. Damien chuckled. I've never been against you. Immediately, a memory from 12 years ago came to his mind. What made you think you could yell at her? Damien had shouted in the face of Ellen, who was standing in the kitchen with a glass of wine, chewing slowly on an expensive cheese. Why do you think she is to blame for your troubles? She's been here longer than I expected. There's no point in living on my money. It's hard work, and she doesn't realize it, said Helene. Really? And what kind of labor do you do? Damien asked snidely, squinting his eyes. A third sentence a day, or maybe sleeping with another man. Why are you looking at me like that? I know about your lovers and the fact that you're cheating on my father. So, you should tell him, Ellen whispered. You can't? Maybe because your daddy's a drunk and he's about to be fired from his job. Oh, you won't even have a place to live. So don't cross me, puppy. You got it? From the hallway came the sound of the door opening. Ellen smiled and waved her hand at the floor, where a large purple mug with some writing on it had toppled over. No, Damien shouted. Oh, Damien, how could you break your favorite mug? Ellen asked, deliberately loud. Vivian flew into the kitchen and saw the purple shards with the boy standing next to it. How dare you? Crooked. Hands, you moron, she shouted. Damien sighed and gave Ellen a long look. These were his last days in this apartment, because soon this woman would kick both him and his father out. Damien knew that, but even more so, he realized that he couldn't do anything to change his mind, or he'd be on the streets for sure. He was sitting in his house when Vivian called and asked him to come over. Luckily, he had a sick day. After hearing about Vivian's problems, he realized he would have to take a mini vacation. Abby was happy to help open up the sick leave. To briefly talk about Damien, we can say that he is quite a kind person. Yes, in high school, and even in college, he was never known for being overly disciplined and submissive. And without hiding the truth, in the army too, not once fell for the rudeness of his superiors. However, with time it passed, and he began to take everything easier. He never refused to help anyone, but at the same time he was not particularly appreciated in the teaching staff. He often ridiculed other teachers, taking the side of students, realizing perfectly well that he had once been the same. Of course, no one could fire him. He did not break any rules, but good relations could not be built. The once popular boy turned into a man who rarely left the house. Most of his friends had left for other cities, and those that remained had families. Damien rarely went out for vacations, devoting most of his time to work. Vivian was a ray of light in his dull and ordinary life. He even enjoyed going to abandoned houses and trying to find Vivian's father. Damien got in his car and drove to the address. He didn't know what Vivian had in mind there, but he didn't care. Talking to her gave him pleasure. He was no longer thinking about how to make it through the weekend. His head was filled with other thoughts. The door to the Johnsons' apartment was open. Damien, you come in, shouted a woman's voice from the far room. The man made his way there and saw a large desk piled with folders, with a laptop standing next to it, covered in pictures. What kind of archive file is this? Damien grinned and threw his backpack on the couch. I had an acquaintance from the American Home Office send over all the documents for my father's missing persons case, the woman said. And how did he send them so quickly? That you traveled overnight to Denver to get them, Damien wondered. Vivian, you're a weirdo, she waved him off and walked over to the stack of folders. Let's go look at everything. Are you going to help or don't you think? Damien asked, approaching the desk. I need to find the culprit, or my father won't be able to go back to normal. Let's figure this out. You can take care of the laptop. There's a file on there with all of Dad's biography, his phone records, and his possessions. An acquaintance did a good job, though. He and I worked in Denver before he moved. He just happens to have access to the database, so he's helped me out a lot. Come on, the sooner we get started, the sooner we'll be done. Oh, by the way, Lily's gonna be here soon. We need to figure out what to tell her. A few hours later, the front door slammed and Lily came running into the room. She was happy and cheerful, clearly wanting to tell her mother something. When she saw the strange man, however, she was embarrassed. Hello, the girl said quietly. Damien smiled and waved. Vivian took her daughter into the kitchen. She was gone for a long time, so the man decided not to waste any time. He continued flipping through the files. His gaze stopped on the largest and most labeled author's file. The man opened it and began to read slowly and thoughtfully. With each line he was surprised more and more. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. Vivian came back in and quietly closed the door. She's really tired, she's already gone to bed. Good thing tomorrow is a day off, no homework to do. Where has she been? Late at a friend's house. Did you find something? What do you know about your father's business? Vivian shrugged. I was 10, didn't have much interest in it then, and when I did, there was no one to ask. I also knew why my mother and I didn't get the business. Yeah, they weren't married, so my mom's last name was Swan. We also didn't get Grandma's 4-bedroom apartment. Not for that reason. There's another, Damien said seriously. Listen carefully. When your father's firm opened, there was a stipulation that shares could not be inherited through bloodlines. That is, when one of the partners dies or withdraws, all the shares go to the remaining partners in the firm. Is that legal? Vivian wondered. Yes, but it's rare. I suspect your father didn't think much about family when he started the firm. He and Mom got together later. But that's not all. Do you know how many partners there were? Vivian shook her head and climbed onto the couch with her feet up. 4. Your father, Matthew, Johnson, and Smith. Do you know how many are left now? 1. Johnson. Do you think? Wait. 3 years before your father went missing, Matthew died. Heart attack. 41 years old. That early. That's not the only thing that's strange. The thing is, the will he left behind said his shares were to be inherited by your father. But that's impossible. He had no right under domestic law to transfer the shares to outsiders. But he transferred them to a partner. And your father got a controlling interest and the ability to run the firm almost on his own. But why did Matthew do that? Damien wondered. Matthew, the 3 M's. That's them on the boat my father made for Lily. There was a sign that's on my boat too. The 3 M's. Matthew. I don't remember much about my father, but I do know that my father fell in love with the sea when he met his friend. And everything in the house connected to the sea was connected to this friend. I couldn't remember his name, but I think it was Matthew. So he left a will to his father. Perhaps he knew or felt something. But that's not all. Damien continued. 5 years later, after your father went missing, Smith died of an accident. 5 years is the time frame after which a person is declared dead, Vivian said thoughtfully. Which means that, by law, the firm passes to the remaining partners, and Johnson, to get the full package, gets rid of the other partner. And remains the sole bannels of the firm, Vivian whispered. So you think my father was eliminated to get the inheritance? Yes, Damien nodded. I suspect that Johnson and Smith conspired to get 50% of the firm's shares that your father had. How did it go unnoticed? Didn't it become suspicious to anyone? They must have been quite cleverly planned, said Vivian, confused. Money is everything. You know who can live and who can't. The only thing that confuses me is the fact that your father is alive, Damien said thoughtfully. Matthew and Smith are dead, but your father isn't. And here it's simple. I think those who wanted to get rid of my father just hid him and dumped him somewhere. I don't know. He survived, and lucky for them, he lost his memory. It's scary to realize that, Damien admitted. But let's take our minds off it for a moment. Do you have coffee? Vivian nodded and got up from the couch. Her gaze was slightly detached. She wasn't looking around, her eyes were fixed on one point. Are you okay? Damien asked gently. So is there coffee? A few minutes later, Vivian was already standing at the stove, making coffee. You're not busy tomorrow? Will you sit with Lillian? I'm going to Casimov to see Johnson. I want to ask him something. Damien, who was sitting at the table, jumped up and in 2 steps was next to Vivian. Are you out of your mind? We just assumed he was responsible for 2 people being dead, 1 20 years without memory, and you decide to go straight to him and declare that you know he's a criminal. Don't scream, Vivian said tiredly, and lowered her gaze to Damien's hands that held her shoulders. She could feel his warmth and strong grip. "Let me go, or the coffee will be on the floor in a few seconds." Damien slowly let go of her, looking down at his hands. He ah-hed, as if waking up. Apparently he had done it unknowingly. "Are you worried?" Vivian asked, not demanding an answer. "I've worked with such personalities, so you don't have to worry about my safety." Vivian looked at Damien with disbelief. "I'll go with you," the man said firmly, his confident gaze fixed directly on Vivian. No arguments. "Yeah, I get why you're so involved in my problems," Vivian asked as they sat down at the table and started drinking coffee. Damien was taken aback and looked at the woman incomprehensively. "But you know, when I met you, the negative emotions that I experienced as a child flared up in my soul. It's childish, I know. Well, haven't you ever had that?" A quiet chuckle escaped Damien's lips, and he shook his head. "No. Maybe it's because I've never felt negative about you." "How could you? You were always playing tricks on me," Vivian exclaimed. "Yes, you said you talked nonsense when you didn't want me to dwell on my thoughts. But that wasn't always the case. You broke the mug my friends gave me, broke my headphones, made fun of me at school, and even told off the guys I dated. You ruined my life," Vivian said slowly, trying to control her sudden emotions. "Remember the new headphones for my birthday? Yes, it was the only present from Aunt Ellen in all the years. Why are you looking at me like that?" "No, wasn't that her present?" Damien grinned. He squinted at the woman, trying to figure out how someone so smart and savvy could be so naive. "The boys and I used to work part-time during the summer. I used the money to buy them. I didn't have enough to buy them, but I had to borrow some from my father. It was his stash in case of a hangover. I had a hell of a time." Vivian looked at the man confused. She gently took his hand and tilted her head. "Why? You needed them so you wouldn't listen to me. I saw how worried you were about them. I thought you hated me. Did you? Did you? I liked Vivian, and I was a stupid boy who liked her that way. Do you understand? It's a corny story, you say." Vivian stared blankly in front of her. In an instant, her world had been turned upside down. She felt that something was wrong, but she could never figure out what it was. Coping with her emotions, the woman jumped up from the table and announced, "It's decided. Tomorrow we go to Kasimov." "Vivian, my dear, is it really you?" "You were about 13 when I last saw you," asked Daniel Forrester, an older man in an expensive suit. He jumped up from his chair as soon as he realized who had come to see him. Damien and Vivian eyed the man warily. It was unclear why he was so hospitable to them. He took them to a local cafe and ordered several not cheap meals himself. "Don't worry, I'm paying. After all, this firm was built by your father with labor and sweat," he said. "It's a shame you couldn't find him. It was you who paid for 8 years to find him." Damien asked. Vivian looked at him shocked. "Yes, I had hoped to find something," Daniel nodded. "But it's like he's gone to ground. All your partners have disappeared, don't you think?" "I recognize my father's grip," Daniel grinned and smiled sadly. "Yes, it was like that. I honestly could never believe it was an accident. First Mike, then Eugene, and then Ben, one after another. I spent the next 6 years taking the trash out with security. I was afraid I'd suffer the same fate." "Weren't you the one who set that fate up?" Vivian asked me snidely. "No, I didn't have to. Ben's death, at least. After your father went missing, the controlling interest went to me, not Ben. Well, I mean, he split it between us, but I had 51%. That's better. Young man, I don't suppose you've ever run a big firm on your own. Believe me, it's not that easy. I was going to give some of my shares to Ben to take over. And Ben knew that. As a professional editor with a degree in philology and 20 years of experience, I did the word processing as follows. And several other lawyers drafted the contract. And then Ben died in an accident. And there was definitely an accident. 2 other workers died on that construction site, safety violations. The site was just shut down. It's all in Ben's file. So I had nothing to do with it." Daniel Forrester smiled sadly and sipped from his glass of water. "Besides, I definitely had nothing to do with Eugene's disappearance. I had no idea when or what time he was going home." Only Ben knew his flight time. Vivian looked at Damien with confusion. If Daniel Forrester was to be believed, their version was crumbling before their eyes. And Ben. How had he behaved in the years since Eugene Stepanovich had disappeared? Damien asked carefully. He was always calling someone and nervous. I was sure he'd just taken a mistress. You could hear in his voice that he was calling a woman. That's quite normal. For him, he was always very nervous and restless. They say that's why he died. You have to stay calm on a construction site. Vivian and Damien asked Daniel Forrester a few more questions and left. Already in the car, they looked at each other confusedly. Do you think it's not him? Vivian asked. Not only did he spend 8 years paying for the search, but he also erected a huge monument to your father. I read in the files he was actually going to give 10% of the shares to Kartashov, which would have made him the leader. I don't think he just changed his mind and took him out. And he couldn't have been involved in Mike's death because he was in Israel for over 6 months. How do you know all this? Vivian snatched the laptop out of Damien's hands and took a deep breath. Who gave you permission? You didn't think I'd let you go talk to an alleged criminal. Vivian turned away from Damien and muttered something quietly to herself. But Damien could see the edge of a smile on the woman's face. I can't get over the fact that Kartashov kept calling someone. I wish I knew who it was. 20 years ago, not everyone had a cell phone, and most people called from landlines. So the lady's number could have been saved somewhere. If Kartashov's things were still there, Damien concluded. Vivian grinned and started the car. I read something too. I can't believe you got into the house, Damien whispered and sneezed. Vivian drove them to the house where Kartashov had once lived. Because he had no one, the house was left empty and became just another abandoned building. In fact, no one lives here. So I don't see anything wrong with it, she said. Did you use a tire iron to knock the boards off the windows and get in? Damien objected. Oh, it's nothing. We'll write it off to the teenagers. Vivian shrugged and walked on, shining her flashlight on the way. Here, Damien shouted. Vivian walked over and saw the phone with the phone book next to it. How will we know which number we need? The woman shrugged and opened the dusty old book. Damien and Vivian gasped at the dust that rose. It's been so many years. After all, the book flipped through very quickly, pages skipping, until Vivian saw a number written in red pen. Judging by the spread of the book, it was the page that had been opened the most. The number had been circled several times in pencil. It's not signed, Damien said. It doesn't need to be, Vivian said sadly. I know it by heart. They walked outside in a terrible mood, not knowing how to react to the news. Damien looked straight into Vivian's eyes. He stepped closer to her and kissed her. Vivian was taken aback. What are you doing? You just got into the house, found the culprit. Well, almost. And probably helped your father. You're awesome. You know that? You're not what I thought you were either, Vivian admitted and blushed. Here's how I edited the continuation of the text according to your instructions. This is the first time in your life you've ever admitted you were wrong, Damien grinned, and Vivian punched him in the shoulder painfully. You can't make me change my mind. Vivian smiled imperceptibly. Ellen Swan, is that you? A tall man in black clothing asked, holding out his ID card in front of him. Did you know Ben Kartashov? No, the woman replied hysterically as she was questioned at the police station. Your phone number was found in his address book. There are also witnesses who saw you together. So what? He was my lover, Ellen held her head high. And the mastermind behind the attack on your brother. He was the only one who knew when he was going home. Eugene was attacked near the train station. An attack? Ellen shouted. Are you out of your mind? Why would I harm my own brother? Your mother's 4-room apartment, answered the investigator clearly and succinctly. You were up to your neck in debt that year. You had loans. And I suspect not only the banks owed. And immediately after receiving the inheritance, 6 months later you put the apartment for sale, and it was very quickly bought. which suggests that a buyer was found early. You paid off the debt, got rid of your brother, whose considerable bank account went to you and his daughter. And since she was young, her mother put her money aside. And when Laurel died, you got the rest. That's where you got the money for the social gatherings. Ellen Swan, isn't it? The investigator asked sneeringly. Your niece has provided all the evidence that will help me put you away for a long time, as well as solve a case from 20 years ago. So you can go ahead and get a lawyer. Ellen, you're definitely going to need one. The investigator was an old friend of Vivian's. She heard the whole conversation thanks to the recording phone. They listened to the tapes with Damien. The man held Vivian's hand. Did you win? He smiled. We did, Vivian corrected and squeezed Damien's hand tighter. 3 years later, a large truck labeled transportation stopped in front of the 3-story house. 2 uniformed men got out of the truck and headed toward the house, keys in hand. An older car was parked next to the truck, from which a blonde-haired man with a large bag on his shoulder got out. He surveyed the area and opened the back door. A tall girl of about 11 years old climbed out. She was smiling cheerfully and looking around, hoping to spot something interesting. She was holding a large paper boat. A short, bald old man with a beard got out of the passenger seat. Loaders, he shouted. Where's Vivian? She should have gotten here before us, Damien replied in a warm voice to the old man, Yugi. Damien shrugged and pulled out his phone to dial Vivian's number. Probably socializing with criminals again. It's such nice weather and she's at work again, the old man complained. Nature around here is so beautiful. May had blossomed, the smell of lilacs was everywhere. And the sun was shining so brightly that it seemed as if summer had already arrived. The trees were covered with little leaves. Birds sang on all sides, and the pond behind the house glistened in the sun. It really was grace. Not just nice weather, but Vivian was at work again. She had been spending too much time there lately, Damien thought. Uncle Damien, look. Lillian shouted and pointed to the road where a police car with flashing lights was coming at almost full speed. 100 meters from the 3-story building, she turned off the siren and began to slow down. The police car stopped in front of Damien. Vivian jumped out of the back seat and waved to the driver and his partner. Thanks, guys. I owe you one. Good luck, she said. Vivian turned around to her family and was met with shocked looks. What about you guys? Actually, they took my car, so I had to improvise, Vivian said. Where have you been? Were you going to miss the housewarming party? Damien asked. Vivian rolled her eyes and walked toward the house. She was in a great mood, and not even her lover's nagging would ruin this wonderful day. For the first time in years, Vivian felt at home in this unfinished building where new furniture had just been brought in. But this place was truly her own. Her whole family would be gathered under one roof, and for the first time in a long time, the woman felt happy. By the way, you were supposed to be at work, too, Vivian said snidely, showing the movers where to carry the big couch. It was your 10th grade class that had a concert in Italy near the principal's house. You got a call, but you didn't answer. I don't take work numbers on weekends, Damien mumbled, wondering what kind of reprimand he'd get on Monday when he got back to his favorite 10th grade class. The head teacher had told him not to take those slackers. But could he refuse them? It was almost impossible. Oh, he'd probably lose his bonus. But what did he have to do with it? It's the end of the year. The boys are having their last free year. Why touch them? Damien froze. Vivian snapped her fingers in front of his face. She chuckled and walked into the house. These blackouts often happen when the man was thinking about something, especially in the last year. Lillian ran into the house first and immediately rushed to the second floor, where she chose the largest and most beautiful room. True, there was nothing special in it yet, but Yuji's grandfather already had a plan to please his granddaughter. Yugi hadn't regained all of his memory, but some of it had definitely returned. He couldn't testify in court against his sister Laurel because the doctors wouldn't give him permission. However, the prosecutor still referred to his memories. However, without his help, Laurel was sentenced to 11 years in a penal colony, and all the money and the apartment returned to the owner. It must be admitted, Abby turned out to be a good doctor. The first successes in treating Yuji appeared in a couple of months, and in 6 months he already remembered his daughter. A year later, Yuji remembered almost all the events of the last 30 years of his life. However, it was very difficult to fully recover his memory. Vivian could not get her father to remember how he met her mother. Yes, and much that was before the birth of his daughter he did not remember. However, that didn't make him any less loved. Lily got used to her grandfather almost immediately. She spent a lot of time with him and often asked for help. Yugi taught his granddaughter how to make paper boats and was very happy to have a family again. He smiled sadly as he remembered the years he had spent on the streets. Damien had also made friends with his father-in-law. Though it had to be admitted, he couldn't get used to him for a long time. His quiet and arrogant demeanor kept Eugene from trusting his son-in-law. Vivian was walking up the stairs to the top of the stairs. She took Damien under her arm and pulled him to the 3rd floor. There was the largest room with a huge window and a small terrace. Vivian and Damien had chosen this place for themselves together. The woman wanted a place to relax on the terrace with flowers, and Damien dreamed of sitting there and reading books. However, their desires did not contradict each other. As soon as the door leading to the stairs slammed shut, Vivian spun in place and started laughing loudly. Damien looked at her with a smile. "Have you decided to go crazy?" he asked. "I guess so. It's just, I feel like this is the first white streak in my life. Like there's never been one before." "A lifetime-long black streak," Vivian replied. Damien slowly walked over to her and hugged her. "May the white streak be as long as the black streak," he said. Vivian reached into her bag and pulled out a framed, yellowed ship. "This is where the symbol of our happy life will hang in this room," she said.